And then when it came down, he's like, all right, I'm ready to ship. I was like, all right, cool. Here's my address. We shipped them out. And I got all kinds of stuff. There were orange isopods. There was like Dalmatians. There was albinos, clowns, and all these I was just like, cool, man. He hooked it up. So I just threw the whole containers in tanks. And then he messages me later that day. He's like, bro, did you get the package? I was like, yeah. He's like, what was in it? I was like, I don't know, a bunch of different types of isopods. He's like, was it the ones like clowns? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, oh, dude, that was like a $400 shipment. It was supposed to go to somebody else. He's like, I can't get him back now. I just emptied him in the tank. And he's like,
yeah, another thing that I would advise against, and I did it in a 12-18, pebbles. People are, oh, you can buy a bag of pebbles from Home Depot for cheap. And my Lord, that was the heaviest tank I owned. And I had a fully bioactive 36-inch tall by 22 wide by 17 deep. And the 12 by 12 by 18 was still heavier than it.
Highly recommend it. You're going to see 10 times the amount of growth from your plant if you don't, or if you have it opposed to not having it. You can even look up online where they've done studies. You'll see 2 patches which are 10 feet apart. One was watered in with a mycorrhizae, the other one wasn't. You'll see the plant's 3 times the size.
Wow, that's amazing.
And
before we get into the cool stuff, let's talk about the really annoying hitchhikers. Fungus gnats being the biggest one, and this was something that I regrettably didn't ask Nick about when I had him on the podcast last time, and I think we all suffer from this. Everybody listening to this who has tropical plants probably... Is there any solution to this, or is it just something we have to live with, these really annoying tiny little flies that just pester us forever? Welcome back to the Animals at Home Network. My name is Dylan Perrin, and you are listening to another Roundtable session. This is Roundtable number 5, and today I'm joined by Troy Goldberg, Mike Tytula, and Nick Mark. All 3 of my guests today have been on the podcast individually in the past, so I'll put those episodes in the show notes as well. So if you do want more information on each specific guest, you can go there. But today's episode, as you can see, it's a long one, as most of the roundtable discussions are. We are discussing plants. So in this episode, we really do cover a lot of ground. We discuss substrate and drainage layers, lighting, fertilizer, type of water to use, the best types of microfauna, including the really annoying hitchhikers that often show up in planted vivariums, such as fungus gnats and garden millipedes, and how to get rid of those. We discuss some of the best places to buy plants in both the United States and Canada. And then we get into a little bit more depth, and my guests list a bunch of different plant species that they use, including how to properly plant epiphytes and climbing plants so they are successful and thrive. And then at the end of the conversation, we actually chat about how to have success with plants with larger reptile species. So we don't solve that problem completely, but we discuss a few different methods that could potentially be used in order to protect the plants from the reptiles destroying them. And the last thing I'll say before we jump into the episode, I have created a PDF sheet that goes along with this episode that lists a bunch of the different plant species that Troy, Mike, and Nick like to use. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, what did they say? What species was that? Don't worry, don't panic if you didn't catch a species or you don't know how to spell it. It's all going to be listed on a PDF sheet for you. And I just sort of broke them down into a few different categories. So you can download that at the website. It's in the show notes at animalsathomenetwork.com. Just click on the round table header or in the show notes or the description on the YouTube version of this episode. So that might be something that you're interested in having. So I just designed it very simple, black and white, so you can print it off without using too much ink. And then there you'll have all the species and much more than were discussed in this episode. All right, without anything further, here's my chat with Nick, Troy, and Mike. Enjoy. Awesome. Well, everyone, welcome to, this is Roundtable number 5, I think, and today we are going to take a dive into plants. We've had a few episodes where we've talked briefly about plants. Obviously, we had Nick on a couple, was that 2 months ago or a month and a half ago, kind of getting into plants. We're going to try to go even further. Reptile keepers often are murdering plants, and I think, one of the things is, I know from you 3 who take great care of plants and have these amazing enclosures, you get a lot of joy out of caring for them. But I think most people get frustrated with them immediately and then gravitate towards just plastic plants because it's so much easier, and they don't really want to suffer through the ups and downs of caring for plants. So before we get too far, I'd like to just start with asking you guys, why keep live plants with your animals, either amphibians or reptiles, and then sort of what joy do you get out of that process? Is it the same sort of joy you get from caring for the animals, or is it a little bit different? So maybe we'll start with Troy.
Okay. Well, obviously for me, it's a little different since I don't keep reptiles. So they don't, well, I actually do have one reptile, but it's very small. and it wouldn't ever damage any plants. But so it's a little different in terms of the reptile keepers that constantly get their plants are getting destroyed by them. But for me, I wasn't always into plants, but I started like, I don't know, I'd see some of the European people's tanks and just some of the enclosures around the world, and they'd be like, oh, those look cool. I wonder if I'd do well with them. And at first I was real intimidated, probably like everybody else, just because the cost back then I thought was expensive, and now it's bonkers. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. So I just kind of started, getting random plants here and there. Some of my friends, they had cuttings, and I actually I don't know about any of the other people, but I actually would rather get cuttings than potted plants. Whenever I get potted plants, I get a ton of die off, and then a couple, like it starts to get new growth, like little by little. But when I do cuttings, it's just like immediately, I don't even plant it. I literally, when people ask me like, how do you plant Macrobius and tennis, or how do you plant your aeroids? I'm like, literally, dude, I throw it in the tank. I just throw it in, just toss it in. Like the setups that we have with the automated misting, my tanks all have that passive ventilation. They're all plumbed, so they drain. So it's like, I don't have to do anything. It's like, I just throw them in there and they do well. Mm-hmm. And then once that started happening, I was like, oh, this is like, I feel like we're cheating. Now all the houseplant people and the reptile, like like the climate and the habitat's just not set up to thrive as much as the dart frogs. So it's like cheating. Yeah, I literally just throw it in and it grows. Okay. And then if I, to get stuff I wanted that I didn't feel like spending, $80 or $100 on back then, just traded and, trade up. Same thing what I did with dart frogs, really. I bred the easy frogs in high numbers and then traded for a couple of the rarer species. And then I bred that and we just worked my way up. So that's kind of how I got into the plant game. But I don't, I'm sure Mike will tell you, because he knows all about what makes the plant green. Like, I don't know, dude. I just give it light and water. I don't claim to be a professional botanist by any means, but I guess you could say I have a green thumb. I don't kill much, and most of the stuff I have does thrive. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we'll do is, I'll let you jump in a second, Mike, is I think what we'll do is maybe compile like a list of plant species that you guys like, because that was one of the things that people asked for, like what species are good. So after we record, before the podcast comes up, I'll make sure that I have maybe a PDF that I'll put together. You guys can just fire species to me and I'll kind of compile a list. And Mike, what about for yourself?
I was just going to continue off Troy's point and just say for Troy, it's especially for the dart frogs, it's almost necessary. The benefits to are to all reptiles, but especially for dart frogs. I mean, you have, like Troy said, the perfect habitat for all these species of plants. So why wouldn't you? And for me personally, I know the original question was, why do you keep live plants and what draws you to them? And for me, it's totally aesthetic. I just like the look of live plants. You can get so much variety. There's different structures, different growth habits, all the differences you can find across the plant world. And then, I mean, secondarily to me, it's the benefits to the animals. There's the microhabitats. It does produce oxygen, humidity boosts. There's a lot of factors that go into live plants that we can't even really detect in a reptile habitat, but just knowing how specialized they have been for the last millions of years, it's kind of hard to deny the benefits and what potential benefits they might have for the actual animals themselves.
Yeah, interacting with plants is literally a part of their biology and a part of their evolution. So providing that is key. And Nick, what about you?
Yeah, really similar to Mike. Like, I love plants to begin with, and they look really good in the tank. They also provide a lot of enrichment for the animal. Like, once the iguana in the back gets his big enclosure, it's going to be filled with stuff that doesn't mind being munched on by him, but it also provides a lot of air filtration for the environment. Like, when I was in school, there was a study going on in one of the offices that was like where we filled it basically with around like 75 cents of area plants, and then testing the oxygen levels inside and seeing how much it improved the air quality was really good. And just adding that to essentially just a closed box, it's going to improve what the animal's actually breathing in the long term.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it's funny because you could make a giant list of benefits that live plants give, and then people go to the pet store and they buy those fake ficus looking leaf silk type plants, and you can only match one thing on the list from the benefits of live plants. Like they can hide in them, and that's about it. They don't even drip water well. Like a lot of those silk plants sort of absorb water, so they don't do almost anything that live plants do. So there is a ton of potential. So now that hopefully everyone thinks, yes, I got to at least try this, let's jump into some of just the basics, because like I said, people are usually pretty rough on their plants. I think maybe the easiest place to start is soil and substrate. I think you probably all have similar, Nick and I talked about this a few weeks ago, but maybe we'll start with Troy again, because I noticed that you had also tried out some aqua soil as well. So maybe you could kind of talk about the substrates that you use or what you have used, what you've had success with.
Yeah. So, I mean, in 20 years, I've used pretty much everything. I don't think there's anything I haven't tried, from just straight cocoa fiber to sphagnum. Someone yelled at me for saying sphagnum. I should say sphagnum mass. I say both. It's weird, but I've used the ABG mix, the Atlanta Botanical Gardens mix. I've used turfus. I've used clay. I've used combinations of all, and then I've only used the aqua soil. That hasn't even been set up for a year, but I don't like, as far as microfauna, growth, mold, or anything like that, like I don't see a difference from the aqua soil and like say an ABG mix. I'm not seeing a difference there. It's like all the plants are doing well in both tanks. Microfauna is doing fine. Yeah, I say microfauna. I'm sure some people just know that as bioactive. The bioactivities is just fine in there. And then I've also used recently the sponge filter mat, which is like they use in, I guess filtration for ponds, and I guess aquarists all overuse that stuff. But I really haven't noticed that. I've got some comments on the sponge filter mat. Like some people will be like, oh, some of those plants are getting, they look sort of yellow. Like some of the aeroids in the leaves, like the old growth turns yellow and dies, but then the new growth looks great and green and everything. And like, I don't know, some people like comment on like Instagram and like, you're having, I forget what it's called, chlora something. One of you guys probably know, but it's when the leaves are just not chlorosis. That's it. Yes. And I'm just like, I don't prune anything. I'm not trimming. Like I plant and I just let it do its thing. Like I don't, and I'm sure that happens in the jungle. Old growth dies and gets yellow, and the new growth looks good. I'm like, this isn't. I'm not setting this up for a show at all times. It's just these are for the frogs. I'm just letting it do its thing. But I honestly haven't noticed a difference. But my three favorite, I guess, substrates are ABG. I do like ABG and turfus mixed. I do like the clay, and I do like the sponge filter mat.
Troy, do you want to explain what turfus is? Because I don't know if everybody will know.
So it's also they're like clay pellets.
Yeah, it's a big clay.
Yeah,
it's basically what they use on baseball diamonds. That's literally what they use.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like I forget where I used to get it. I used to get it at some like agriculture place.
Yeah.
They used to sell it a huge bag of it. But it works well. I mean, mixed it. I don't know if like some people were using it back in the day to think that, the frogs were absorbing some of the minerals from the clay, but I'm not so sure on that. I think the calcium bearing clay that people are using nowadays is definitely like it's like turfus on steroids, I guess. Way more benefits than that, but it's also the calcium bearing clay can become quite messy and muddy in a super humid wet environment. So I've been using it in like in cups. I make like little cups of it and kind of set them in the vivarium for frogs to go soak in. But Yeah, I guess to answer your question, I don't really see a big difference from ABG, the aqua soil that I use, the ADA aqua soil, or I think it was I don't know if it's the Amazon. Is it Amazonia?
Amazonia.
Yep.
Okay, because I messed up the Amazonia Institute tank and I called it an Amazonica, and I don't know, one of those two I got roasted for. I was like, look, man, I had a few too many to drink.
Internet wizards got you.
They got me. I'll never live it down. But yeah, I just don't really see a notice in those. I'd consider those like the premium higher end substrates for amphibians. And, that's all I know. But yeah, I don't really notice a difference of what's better than the other.
Yeah.
They all drain well and they all get good growth. So that's really what I look at.
Yeah, in some ways, I think people tend to maybe overthink the substrate too much, and it's almost like analysis paralysis where they don't know what to do. And I think we'll try to touch on a little bit of the Arid stuff later, which I know Troy probably doesn't have as much experience, but maybe Mike and Nick do, because I know some people will be thinking about that as well. But what about you two? Do you have anything to add to that? Maybe we'll start with Mike, and then we'll go to Nick.
Yeah, I think I just agree with Troy, basically. Like, the ABG is probably the best. I make my own mix. Tree fern has been really hard to get in Canada previously.
I was going to say, is it a true ABG recipe?
It's not a true ABG recipe, no, but we do have, like, where I work now, we actually did get in a ton of tree fern fiber, so I could make an ABG recipe. But beyond that, I just kind of substitute the tree fern fiber with like orchid bark and stuff. So it's still a relatively nutrient dense, well draining substrate, and it does really well. I will be trying a Troy method of the sponge foam, and then beyond that, though, I think it's also important to mention what not to use. And please, for the love of everyone, do not plant plants in pure coconut fiber. They will not do well.
Hey, pothos will do it.
True.
Where there's a will, there's a way pothos will figure it out. But beyond that, it's pretty much useless. So, I mean, there might be people out there that think you can do it, and you might be able to do it for a month or two, but in the end, it will crash.
Yeah.
So,
Mike, I was going to ask you, do you plant many plants in ABG itself? Like, I tend not to. It's like the ground is ABG, and there'll be like a couple of vines. I start there, but I leave most of the ground areas in my tanks like pretty bare. It's like leaf litter, moss, and wood. Most of the plants I have, they all climb the background and they root it. It's like they just use the background over the wood. So I was just wondering if like a lot of people,
I did. I planted like in my chameleon tanks. I had the ficuses in there. I had pothos. I had a little pot of just basically sphagnum and peat with nepenthes in there. RIP. There was there's a lot of different like ficus, scleropteras, that kind of deal. So yeah, I mean they grow well in it.
Right on.
And Nick, did you have anything you wanted to throw on top of that as well?
Like basically for my idea for the substrate, as long as it has the proper amount of nutrients and that it's not being anaerobic, it will work fine. Like the biggest problem I see with most people, especially when it's like coconut fiber, a few isopods, and then a pothos,
it's bioactive, Nick.
It basically, you get the coconut fiber, which is essentially like it's inert. It doesn't really have hardly any nutrients in it to begin with. So when you throw the plant in there, whatever carbohydrates it's living off of at that point are what's going to carry it out. And then that's where you get the plants that just crash. So as long as you have a decent like NPK reading of your substrate, then it's going to be fine.
Yeah, and that's the thing that, I mean, I made that mistake a long time ago when I first got my crested gecko. I've had them for so long now, but you go back 10 years, cocoa fiber was like the golden thing. They're like, buy the brick, and it's just like this amazing substrate. And it was the same sort of thing. Like, I thought it was fine. The pothos, like we said, they can survive in that because they're just like warriors. It doesn't matter what the conditions are. But when I started digging up the substrate, eventually when I realized you start getting that anaerobic smell, it's like sulfur, methane, and you're like, this is really bad. And, luckily the animal doesn't dig in it, but had he been digging in it, you'd have been just like gassing yourself. So yeah, you do want to have, I guess so how do you figure out the nutrient profile? Is it just easy just to get a reading, Nick, or do you
Yeah, you can buy test kits that are relatively cheap that will tell you what you're sort of pushing out in terms of nutrients. But for the most part, if you're following like an ABG mix or another recipe, there's tons online. As long as it has a high enough nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium level in it, most of your plant species are going to do quite well.
Is there a standard like NPK value for a typical ABG mix that you know of?
I'd have to look it up, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But
okay.
What about
I guess,
depth?
go ahead.
Or were you gonna sit on that nutrient side? Because I'll leave us there. Yeah, go for it.
I was just gonna ask Nick. I mean, he would be no more than I do about like when I'm using the sponge filter mat. I mean, that obviously has 0 nutrients, but I do cover it with live moss. That's pretty much all I do, and then I'm just even like there's some pretty rare philodendrons and anthuriums that I've done really well with, and all I'm doing is I just make a root ball with the sphagnum moss, and I'm just pinning it to the background, then it roots into the moss and the sponge filter mat. So like I would think that's not a whole lot of nutrients.
Like it's probably not, but again, with a lot of these aroids and philodendrons, they're semi-epiphytic. So at some point in time, they're going to start either up from a seed inside the tree and then branch down to the dirt, or it's going to be they're going to climb up and then something's going to cut the vine. So they're quite capable of going off of relatively low nutrient. And then when you have like your cleanup crew, they're going to break stuff down enough that the plant will be able to absorb the nutrient from whatever is available.
Cool. Thanks.
And so what about depth? What are your guys' thoughts on substrate depth? I think this is one area where I think the hobby is going to start moving towards much deeper substrate, especially on the reptile side, because it helps us maintain humidity, but also gives the animal something to dig in and more space to root. So I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that.
I'm the opposite. I'm less substrate.
Yeah,
I was going to say for Troy and for aroids and stuff, you really don't need much. I mean, in Troy's case, don't need any in some tanks. They're basically just going to root into the background, and like Nick said, like the frogs will create waste, and the rain will kind of wash that waste down. And Nick will know more about this than I do, but aroids create specific arboreal roots, like roots that grab onto stuff, and they're designed to have a higher affinity and actually draw in more nutrients from that water, like passing over them in a short time. So they don't have to be soaked in, soil or whatever to actually absorb a lot of nutrients. For me, it kind of alluded to it, but it really depends on the animal. I typically, on average, will make like 3 to 4 inch substrate barriers, I suppose, of substrate depth. So that's kind of where I max out. But like in that chameleon tank, when I had the trees and stuff in there, it was like an 11.5 inch substrate dam. And, an inch and a half or 2 inches of that was drainage material, right, like the leca. But other than that, it was probably like 8-9 inches of soil. And the chameleons didn't dig in it at all. And they were live bearers, so they wouldn't even dig in for eggs either.
Right. But yeah, you need that extra depth for the roots. And Nick, do you have anything on that one?
Yeah, it doesn't, it's very variable depending on what you're actually keeping and what plants are going in with your inhabitant. So like, again, if you have like a really burrowing species, you're going to want a deeper substrate because it's going to benefit them in a number of ways. But at the same time, if you're growing plants with a species like that, you have to be really selective because it's going to get ripped out of the ground. Mm-hmm. But it's all up to what you're mixing and matching, essentially.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, what average or what depth are you going to go for your iguana when you get its full tank? Or are you thinking you're going to go?
Is it just a green iguana?
Yeah, Murphy. He really wants out of the tank right now. He's scratching at the window. But probably I'm looking at doing, because it's going to be a decent size enclosure that cohabs with the tortoises. So probably 1 foot to 2 feet deep. And then in there, I'm going to have planted pothos as well as hibiscus species.
How big of a tank is it?
How big? It's going to be probably, depending on materials and whatnot, but about 7 foot tall by 7 foot wide by 5 foot, 7 foot by 7 foot tall, 7 foot long, and then 5 foot wide.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's huge. And that's the other thing with it, with a deep substrate, that's going to be like a couple 100 pounds of soil. That's the other thing to consider. So now that we've kind of discussed the soil, and obviously one of the things I think you guys have mentioned, but I'll just make sure I highlight, is that ability for it to drain. So whatever you're mixing, making sure that it has that sort of spongy, airy soil to make sure the water is flowing through. And then obviously the next step there is the drainage layer. And I think drainage layers are one of those things where I think people just put together and maybe don't think about it a lot, because sometimes you see people on Instagram, they have a drainage layer and the water is like completely full and it's like bleeding up into the soil, and you think, okay, this is not right. So I think one of the biggest mistakes people make with the drainage layer is not allowing the drainage layer to drain. So maybe Troy, you could quickly discuss how you tackle that. I think we all probably are similar as far as draining that layer, but what do you do?
So yeah, it's evolved again, being in this for 20 years. I used to do the PVC risers, and then an egg crate, and then the barrier, and then your substrate. And I had those issues like you were just mentioning. The water would get so tall, and then the substrate's completely waterlogged, and I'd have to stick some sort of tube in there and siphon it out. It worked. Eventually that substrate would dry out. But then a month and a half, 6 weeks later, it's full again. And that just got to be a pain, and I guess maybe I'm too lazy. I don't like doing that. So I started drilling my tanks for a bulkhead. And it's all automated. It just drains right outside of my garage. All the tanks are tethered together, which I wish I would have did it a different way. I should have did every tank individually. In terms of pathogens, since they're all tethered together, if I got something really bad like chytrid in one tank, it could potentially just transfer over to the other tank with water. Somehow, if it was wintertime and it wasn't draining out and they got backed up. So I wish I would have did it the other way. When I move, and whenever I do move, I'm going to do it that way. But everything's drained. It's plumbed with bulkheads. So it's something I never have to worry about.
Are they drilled on the bottom or the side?
I do it in the back. In the back.
On the back.
In the back on the place. Yeah. So I could do them on the bottom, but the reason I don't is because a lot of times I'm moving tanks by myself. So I'm sliding it on the wire rack. Yeah. And when I did my 180 gallon tank, I did drill the bottom, and I just wasn't used to it. And I had I think it was a 1-inch bulkhead, and I had a big PVC pipe sticking out, and then completely forgot about it when I did the background. And when I flipped it back up, just completely cracked. And the bottom was supposed to be 3/8, but the guy who made it with 1/4 inch, completely cracked the whole bottom. So I had to redo that. So yeah, I think there's more harm. I mean, I guess you can have more damage, more accidents, more boo-boos, whatever you want to call it, when you do drain on the bottom. It's just easy to forget, because I feel like the tank is more upright than on its back. Yeah. I don't even turn tanks on their back anymore to do the backgrounds. I just do them vertically. So that's why I drill them in the back. And yeah, it's just something I never have to worry about, is siphoning or the substrate getting waterlogged. I never have to worry about it. So that's kind of why I do it that way.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody else want to jump in on that?
Nick can go if you want. I can. I have something to say, but I'll let Nick go if he wants.
Yeah, that's basically, or not the I've been siphoning with my previous tanks, where I just have a drainage layer of lava rock for like 2 inches, and then I'd have like a pop bottle that I cut in half and then kind of stick it in the corner, and then I just use that to draw it all out every once in a while.
Yeah. That's another way. It just takes a little more maintenance, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another way is another PVC tank, or like PVC tube, or I use like a thicker 1-inch just drainage hose, like from anywhere that you can buy for your aquarium, or 3/4 inch it might be, but you can just stick that in the corner, and it's kind of inconspicuous, and it goes all the way down to the bottom. You can just put a little airline tubing in there and drain it out that way. More recently though, it's just more limited misting and kind of balancing out the misting cycles. Obviously, if you're doing like a rain chamber or the big tank you see behind Troy, like that's not feasible. So You just got to kind of make your own solution to that, whether it's in the back, the side, or just built into the tank. But it is crucial to have an actual drainage area and a method to drain said drainage area.
Yeah, it's not enough just to have it.
Yeah,
I have one more thing to touch on
Sure.
on drainage layers. If someone asked me what should I do for a drainage layer, I think the one thing I would point them away from, like lava rock's fine, Leica or hydroton, that's fine. The sponge filter mat is fine, but I would advise against what I used to do with the PVC riser and the egg crate, mainly for springtails, because springtails, they get under and they float on the water. And so they're just sitting. I mean, you're like, where's all my microfauna? You're looking in the tank and you see a little bit, but not much. And then you look on the side, and there's just a gazillion of them just floating in the water. And the only time they're able to get back up on top of the land is when you flood it, basically. So having like lava rock or Leica or anything like that, they can always crawl back up on, they can get out of the water, basically. They're not just suspended there underneath the substrate. They can come up whenever, if you put, bug burger or banana or some sort of food in there for them to eat, they will come back up, which is nice. So that's why I'd say I would advise against the egg crate riser. And also, I think it looks terrible when someone doesn't cover it and you just see this like white PVC thing. You're like,
Yeah.
dude, just cover it with black vinyl or something. It looks god awful.
Yeah.
I'm way, I'm super into like aesthetics. That's kind of one of the reasons I talked about not using a deep substrate. Like I think a smaller substrate, like a substrate dam on the tank and taller doors, it looks so much nicer than, a 6 to 8 inch, substrate dam. And then the tank's only 24 inches tall. And you're like, it looks super stubby. I don't know. That's just my personal opinion, but go ahead, Mike, you said you had something.
Yeah, another thing that I would advise against, and I did it in a 12-18, pebbles. People are, you can buy a bag of pebbles from Home Depot for cheap. And my Lord, that was the heaviest tank I owned. And I had a fully bioactive 36-inch tall by 22 wide by 17 deep. And the 12 by 12 by 18 was still heavier than it. Like, keep that in mind when you're building it, because I'm lifting it onto the shelves like,
What was the drainage layer that's not made anymore? I used to love it.
Pumice
no, it's like lava rock, but it's white. Why can't I think of it?
Featherstone?
Featherstone?
No. It's made from glass. It's like,
I know exactly what you're talking
perlite?
about.
Is that what
It looks like perlite, but it's not.
Looks like it.
It looks just like it. Why can't I think of it?
I thought perlite was made from
I'll look
glass
for
as
it.
well.
One sec.
Yeah, someone get on that.
I used to use it all the time. They stopped making it, I guess, because the company that made it got in trouble with the IRS or something, like big time. So it's no longer made. Why I hate that I can't think. I used to get it from Rizzo, or Amazon used to sell it in these huge bags if I didn't feel like paying what Mike wanted me to pay him. But what was it, Mike? Come on now.
You know what? I'm gonna text Steve.
Yeah, text Steve.
Steve will know.
Well, and I think the clay balls are really the best because they are light and they're pretty cheap to buy. And I think some people don't realize, I always see people messaging, where do you find those? One place you can buy them is actually IKEA. Now, you can't buy huge bags, but if you need a little bit, IKEA actually sells them. But most hardware stores sell them as well as, or like garden stores, as well as like any grow shop will sell you like a dog food bag size of clay balls. So, and that kind of raises another point. What Troy was saying is, it's nice to have an enclosure where you can visually see the drainage layer as well. So maybe if you do cover it in vinyl, have a place where there's like a window where you can see it, maybe around the side where it's not going to ruin the way it looks aesthetically, but to be able to monitor it visually, because or else you don't know if it's draining properly. And I think that maybe even you can make a tank, I guess, maybe that had a really deep substrate layer that was completely blocked. So maybe it didn't have that stubby look, but so it didn't look like a stack of soil with a little bit of window.
I'll interject.
I usually leave the
with
sides
an
exposed.
Yeah. I'll interject with an answer when Steve gets back to me. And then we'll all sit there and go,
I have
like it's on the tip of my tongue.
It is not on the tip of my tongue. I will be surprised to hear it.
It was awesome because it was lighter than the Hydroton or the Leica, and so it was lighter in weight, and it was not just round balls. It was like kind of shaped, looked like rocks. But yeah, it was awesome for microfauna, and it it was like white in color at first, but then after the tannins and everything from the drainage, it turned it so you didn't have to really cover it. It looked like a natural stacked like substrate, like what you would see. So yeah, you didn't even have to really cover the front, which was nice on it.
Well, BioDude sells something that's like a white drainage layer, and it's kind of like a perlite type material. So I wonder if that's sort of the same type of thing.
It probably is.
Yeah.
It may be called something else.
Yeah.
Well, with him, he calls stuff all kinds of different things.
Yeah.
I'll look. I'm trying to
BioShot. Might be the bio. Mike, do you have BioShots?
We have them at work.
You use them?
No.
Why?
That's for another podcast, Troy.
Okay.
Well, as we wait for the drainage layer answer, maybe we'll move on to lighting, because that's another area where I think people throw a small UV lamp on and their plants burn up and die. So as far as, maybe we'll start with Nick, is there anything special for lighting that you use, or are you just kind of open to a bunch of different things?
I've tried pretty much everything you can, and I'd say that using, like, I know shop LED lights work really well if you're on a budget. The more professional grade grow lights are obviously going to be much more effective, but with that you're going to have also a pretty nice price tag on it too. But definitely, like with my grow tanks, what I'll do is take the 600 Kelvin little LED bulbs, and I'll actually cut the plastic off of it, which shows it, and then basically it's bright enough to do all of your growing needs. That's like a budget one, but
that's a regular bulb that you just remove. You remove the outer layer of it.
Yeah, I just Dremel off the
like
top
the
of it,
plastic.
which is just a plastic covering,
Yeah.
which just diffuses light, and then you get all the little LED diodes that you can see, and then it's plenty bright enough to grow most stuff.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's definitely a cheap method. And what about Troy? What do you use?
So I've used a ton of different things. For the frog room, I definitely use the LED shop lights because I'm lighting, I don't know, 30 some tanks. And I've had great results with them. And the bromeliads, they turn red when they're when they're up higher. Most of my plants stay really green, and moss grows well. So yeah, that's all I'm looking for. And I just buy I think I use the 6,000 Kelvin. 6,500 to me, depending on what brand or whatever you get, a lot of them look too blue to me, and it's just not something I prefer. I like more of a pure white or even whitish yellow, but I don't like the dingy yellow, like the 5,000 is way too yellow, even 5,500. But 6,000 is kind of the sweet spot I like. And yeah, so that's what I use on all my frog room tanks. I do have a couple from Spectral Designs, or I think is the name. It's whoever the in situ, the in situ tanks, they supply them. It's a nice light. It's very bright. The light you could definitely cook eggs on it. It's super hot, which I don't like. It kind of makes me nervous sometimes. I turn it down to like a quarter or halfway, because when it's on full blast, I can't keep my hand on it for 3 seconds. It's like I'm getting third-degree burns.
Wow.
My 180-gallon tank, I have T5 high outputs, and it was a grow light. It used to come in a discrete box because it looked like you were growing pot. So that company is no longer in business, but that fixture is amazing. My buddy Josh Moore used to use it. He's the one who turned me onto that. And the ballast has like this reflector in it, which makes it look like there's like 40 bulbs. Like it's a crazy reflector, but it grows. I've had awesome growth in that tank. I've used, the Jungle Dawns. They're okay. I think they're wildly overpriced. Dinkman Herps LEDs, I've used those. Again, wildly overpriced. It's like those things are like $40-$50, and you literally, on me, I feel like I was using 2 per tank. It's like $100 to light a 30 to 40 gallon tank is outrageous. When I'm using basically for a whole rack for 4 tanks, I'm lighting for like $60. And so in the frog room, that's why I use the LED shop light. But
Yeah.
I think people definitely overlook the lighting in terms of for the frog. I mean, the frogs don't need it. So, but if you're growing plants, that's why Nick would know a lot more than that as far as the actual plant growth. He would know way more than me.
Mm-hmm. And Mike, what do you use, or have you played with?
I've kind of run the gambit. Like Troy said, Arcadia, they have a really good spectrum and they grow plants really well and they are really bright, as you know, Dylan.
Yeah.
But again, for like a 12-inch LED, it's something like $80 Canadian, something around there.
Yeah, they're expensive.
So it's wildly expensive for what it is. And I mean, yeah, they're good, but a lot of people are also, why? And I got sent the Exoterra bulbs, and they're good. They're not super, super bright, but they actually do grow plants. And I know I made a video on it, and it wasn't curling up any bromeliads or anything. But since then, I've just kept the light running on it, and it actually has started to color up bromeliads. So for 35 Canadian, which is like 27 American or something like that, they're a good bulb. They are short though, so it's really, you're going to need 3 or 4 if you have a long 30, 40 gallon, whatever.
Yeah.
I've also used the skylight LEDs, and they are, again, very bright, and they work really well. Beyond that, T5s, the benefits of a T5 over the LEDs is they diffuse the light really well. So I know, like, if you're into like the saltwater hobby or whatever, you'll hear the kind of debate of, what's better, LED or T5, because T5 gives a much more uniform light and creates more natural shadows than the LEDs, where it's more of a spotlight over top and creates really harsh shadows. So it kind of depends what you're looking for. Troy, like Troy said, I mean, the 6,500 to 6,000 Kelvin is kind of where you want to be at. And then, I mean, the par value of the light is what you actually need to look at to kind of tell how well it's going to grow plants or how strong the light is. But most of us don't have a par meter. So
yeah.
Grow stones. That's what grow stones.
Yep.
Oh, grow stones.
That's what the
grow stones.
Yes. Grow
I'm pretty
stones
sure
is what's called.
Steve said it was also pumice, not glass.
I think Mike Rizzo was telling me it's glass. He told me like the whole story on how wherever it was made, but I think it may have even been in Michigan.
Because I thought perlite was glass, but maybe I'm way off there. I don't know.
No, perlite's just basically expanded rock in a volcano.
Oh, okay.
It's popcorn of the rock world.
Yeah. And I think perlite kind of breaks down, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it does. Like you could just pop it with your hand. It turns into dust. It's horrible.
That's why that's the difference of grow stones. You couldn't do that with. I mean, grow stones, you'd get dust from it, but they held up. I mean, you could put 40 pounds of weight on it, and that drainage
didn't crush.
It doesn't. Right. That's why you can't really do the perlite because I have like a monster bag of perlite that's been sitting outside of my garage. So I thought it was the same stuff, and I messaged Rizzo, and he was like, "No, dude, you can't." Like,
yeah, and every time you pick up that bag, it probably makes a cloud of dust. Like I have one too. I'm like, "Oh, I'm going to use this. It's so cheap," and now it's like I can't even touch it without creating a dust storm. Like, damn it, this stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And,
exactly.
I looked at the Biodude media. The stuff that he uses is actually just turfus.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
Mike, I was going to ask you. Did Trey show you that glass? Speaking on light. That glass where that UVB penetrates, it's insane.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I'm getting
what
a
is
quote
it?
from him.
Is it the borosilicate or something?
Yeah,
like
borosilicate glass. It actually allows UV to penetrate it, and it didn't actually filter out that much. I'm not sure the thickness or anything like that.
Hardly. I think it's.
I think he
got
1/8.
3 millimeter. I think it was 3 millimeter.
Yeah.
So 1/8 inch. Yeah.
So it was.
It's insane though. He tested it and like. Through nothing filtering it. I forget, like at the top it was like 31 or something, and then
it was really high. He needs to chill on the light bulb. But it's like I said to him, he sent me a video, and I was like, I mean, besides the fact that UVI reading literally doesn't exist on Earth, it's cool.
So is it just a piece of glass that we'll use as a lid? Or
yeah, so basically, so in tanks where like, you know, it's kind of an issue for, so he was saying certain chameleons that you want to have the high humidity, but they need that UVB, and it's like it's so hard to, you know, with your house, you know, whatever the ambient room temperature and humidity is, to keep that tank at the right humidity, because you need the screen to have the UVB. And he's like, you know, this you could literally do, you know, a 90% glass top with a little bit of screen for just regular filtration, and they're going to be able to get that UVB from it. And it could change. I see it as a big game changer for reptiles that, you know, people are using screen tops for that reason, but they're trying to keep humidity in. For dart frog people, most of us don't need, like, really strive to use the UVB, but
even that said, you know, now you can use UVB for dart frogs, and I know you do anyway, so you won't have to tape the door closed and shove the little lamp in there.
It works. It's unfiltered UVB. They love it. You get off my back.
So is that something that's not available yet, right? Is that something, that product that's being tested, or what is?
You can buy borosilicate glass from places.
Okay.
It's I don't know what his plans are with it, or what the whole deal with that's going to be.
He's planning on bringing a bunch in and just
I think so.
selling to people. So
yeah.
Yeah, but this is my buddy Trey, who's kind of notorious for finding a really cool product and then like saying he's going to bring it in, and then it's like doesn't. It's like,
happens.
Oh, okay.
Well, we won't build it up too much. On that.
Yeah.
But you can
wait on this.
You can buy it from other glass places. It's not cheap. Like it's,
I bet. No.
Obviously, there's the high iron, like green looking glass. There's the low iron, really high quality glass.
This is Starfire here.
That's Starfire, nice.
So the doors are.
For people that don't know, that's the really low iron glass, and it basically just has higher clarity and more fidelity to actual, like to your eyes perception, essentially.
I don't think it's worth the doors. It was $278 for my doors.
Think it is.
I didn't realize that. I thought they were going to be like 100 rather than like 40, and they were like, yeah, 278. I was like, oh, okay, here you go. Good Lord. But yeah, I don't think it's worth the money, because you really only see it on the edge. So like on the sides, if you wanted it to be really clear, or like if you got really thick glass on an aquarium, I think it'd be worth that. But you know, for what I'm doing, I was like, well, that's kind of a silly decision, but live and learn.
Hey, now you know. So, well, it's interesting. Yeah,
that's right.
One other thing I want to, as we're sort of sitting on light here, you're talking about, I think all three of you have mentioned that using the proper light, you get these bromeliads to color up and whatnot. So, Nick, maybe could you talk a little bit what's going on there? Is that an intensity of light that allows those to start purpling up, or what's the deal with that?
Yeah, so to my understanding, it's basically most plants will have some form of natural sunscreen. So when you're getting bromeliads, and different cactuses will do this too, they'll basically just color up, and that's a way to protect their chlorophyll from actually getting burned up. And that, like, I've had the mistake when I first started growing bromeliads in a tank. I've actually burned the leaves because of how close they were to the light. Oh boy.
That was an iguana jumping on the mic for anyone listening.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's basically, to my understanding, a form of sunscreen, and the higher intensity the light will be, the more coloration you're going to get from your bromeliad.
Okay, yeah, so that's just like the pigments building up in the leaf to protect it. And so I guess it would be an intensity of light, and because when you were saying you're burning leaves up, was that from the heat, or was that from being too close to UV, or?
That was just under an LED light, actually. Oh, okay. So it's like just from whatever factors were going on with it, it didn't feel, or the plant felt that it was getting burned somehow. And basically a bunch of, I believe I think it's anthocyanin is what is the red coloration. It's the same stuff that are in tree leaves in the fall time. But
I actually remember that. My minor's in bio, or in botany basically, but it's been a long time since I've accessed that part of my brain.
Try to make some fun of somebody else.
There you go. Yeah.
Only you, Mike. Only you.
As far as watering goes, this is a pretty basic question. Is there, there's different ways, misting and whatnot. We don't necessarily have to go into how you're procedurally doing it, but is anybody using special water or distilled water, or is anything, maybe Troy with your misters are using distilled water to make sure you're not getting calcium buildup on the glass, or?
I have an RO unit.
Okay.
So I use reverse osmosis water for the misting, and then I use. I've recently switched over. I used to use RO water on tadpoles, but I think it was too pure or something. So I started using spring water for tadpoles just so they could have more minerals.
Okay.
And I've seen a little boost, but yeah, with plants, I use RO water all the time.
What about anybody else? Does anybody else use anything special, or just tap water or whatever?
I used to use RO water as well, but since moving out here, we don't have an RO unit, so I just use standard.
Do you have a
tap
mister,
water,
or are you just misting by hand?
We have like a giant. One sec. For those of you watching, I'm holding up a giant like
a pesticide
orange
mister type
highlighter orange, pesticide mister. I do have 2 Mist Kings waiting to be still set up, but I need to get the actual final tank shaking or Troy shaking his head. But I got just 2 Mist Kings just sitting in the back waiting for the new tanks.
Why won't you set it up? I just don't get it.
Because it's going to change so much.
Will you run RO through them?
I don't know. Hopefully, but probably not, to be honest.
I would.
Filtered works pretty good.
You would?
Yeah, those Mist King nozzles, that little screen filter in there, it's super.
It gums up. Yeah,
really
it gums up really fast. I mean, I
gum it up even with my RO. It still gums up.
Wow,
so it's like, and I change my RO filters like every 3 months. I change them all.
Wow. Yeah,
really. Wow.
I mean, I'd like to find a way, and there is like a water purification system that Bree's parents have. So I might be able to find a way to just kind of do what Troy does and have it run into like a tank and then turn on an automated pump to fill the reservoir. But I'll have the mister set up long before that happens. So
you don't have any running water in the basement?
We do.
So just get just set up an R unit through there. It's so easy. You get it. All you'd have to do is literally, you could run your Mist King directly from the reservoir. That's what I used to do in the house. I had a 37-gallon trash can with a float valve, and so right at the sink, those little drop sinks by your laundry, whatever, downstairs.
Yeah.
I just had the water go to the RO and go right into the 37-gallon reservoir, and then it would, once it's filled, the float would stop the RO from turning on, and I had my Mist King pumps plumbed right into that reservoir, and then I ran all the lines through my house. So it's like I never had to refill anything or do it. It was just. That's what sucked moving out to the garage. I have no running water out here, so that's why I have to get a rig that pump to pump water out here, which sucks. But that's if you have access down there, I'm jealous of you, like super jealous.
Well,
I would
ask for tips from you when the time comes.
ASAP. It's so easy. It's just one less thing you have to ever do.
Yeah.
I had this mister that I bought a couple years ago. I bought it from like AliExpress, so it came right from China, and I was like, oh, it's like $50 or $45. It's so much cheaper than the Mist King. I'm just gonna buy it. So I bought this thing, and it only lasted about 14 months before it just stopped working, and now I have a Mist King. But the biggest thing was the sound of this pump. It literally sounded like a machine gun going off in this reptile room every a couple times a day.
No.
And I had no idea. Like I was like, I guess that's just how loud diaphragm pumps are. But then the Mist King is like, I'm like listening for you. You can't even hear it. I cannot believe how quiet they are. It's just so much worth the money.
They get noisy.
One random rack, like it's sitting under a rack or whatever, and it hits and it goes
yeah.
You
gotta make sure it's
like,
not touching.
Yeah.
They'll get noisy if the reservoir runs dry.
Yeah.
And then when you put water back in, when they start like sputting, I do it all the time and I get pissed at myself. But yeah, when they run dry, they're noisy the next time you go to use it.
Okay, yeah. So far I haven't let it
about
run
3 to
dry.
4 days.
Yeah, nothing like the old one though. People would be like in my living room, they're like, "What is that? What's happening in there?" Nick, do you have anything on water?
It depends again on what plant you're growing. Like most of my plants, I just use tap water because ours is fairly good right here. Carnivorous plants, definitely you want to use really low mineral content stuff.
Yeah.
Even for some of the bromeliads, because if you think about where they're getting their water, it's straight from rain. It's not being drawn up from the roots like you would a plant that's sitting in the ground. But yeah, most of the time tap water is good as long as it doesn't have an extreme mineral content in it.
Okay. So we had touched on...
I know a lot of people age it.
Age water?
Yeah.
Aged tap water. They it's
I
like tap water and then just set it out for 3 or 4 days. And
just in
then
case, it's basically to release all the chlorine.
chlorine evaporates.
Yeah,
that
and
makes
then it only really needs to sit out for like 12 to 24 hours. It doesn't actually need to stay out for too long. But
yeah. So we were talking about the soil or the nutrient content of soil before, and so one question that people, I posted a question on Instagram the other day to see if anyone had plant questions, and one that kept coming up was fertilizer. I think people get very afraid of fertilizer because they see it as poison, but I think there are safe ways to use it as well. So I don't know, does anyone use fertilizer here with their plants? No,
before Nick.
Just Nick.
I do. Like, depending on what it is, I'll use. You can do compost tea, which is going to be the safest for your animals. So essentially that would be, if you have, say, a worm farm or whatever, it's all the drainage that these worms produce. And it's going to be filled up with all the broken down stuff you've been feeding them in the compost bin.
Is that worm castings?
And then it's also, it's a little bit different. So it's basically your worms are going to be pooping, which is the worm castings, but all the juices that the worms produce and excrete from their bodies, it's basically a urate of sorts, or urine. It's you're going to have just a bunch of bacteria that are really beneficial in there, and really, I believe it's really high in nitrogen, so it's really good for your growth phase of your plant, which makes it really green and bushy. And then you just dilute it with a certain percentage of water, and it should be safe for your animals, because it's not like it's a chemical fertilizer, which are like straight nitrogen mixed with a ton of salt and all these other chemicals.
Yeah. Do you use anything that's not just the worm pee?
Oh yeah, for sure. On basically any of my plants that aren't in with animals, they get a regular fertilizer.
Okay.
And then it'll be just on a regimen of whenever I notice that the plant needs some.
But if it's in with animals, you wouldn't do anything other than the worm waste.
It's probably not going to hurt your animal to extreme. I wouldn't use it with amphibians for sure because of how porous their skin are. Like a lizard would probably be okay as long as they're not munching on where it's getting watered in on a weekly basis.
Yeah. I mean, I know in some of my old tanks, I haven't done it recently at all, but I'd actually just use the like fertilizer spikes and push them into the soil and use that. And that was when I had like the Lygodactylus Williams eye and some of the other tanks that I had, running, and I saw no ill effects from it. So it's kind of something that you have to research yourself and interpret how much risk you either want to, expose your animals to or not. I know compost teas, you can also just use straight up compost and literally brew it like a tea and let it sit for a while, and it'll get those beneficial bacteria and have similar amounts of nutrients as well. But if you're not making your own compost, I'd be a little sketched out by it, especially for a reptile tank, just based off, what were those, what was that compost being made from?
Yeah.
When you're throwing in your bell peppers and some lettuce and stuff, you're like, cool, whatever. But who knows what those commercially produced composts are made from. And then I also occasionally will do like a foliar feed as well. So I'll basically just mix up some organic fertilizer in like a spray bottle and just spray down the tank a little bit. Most of the time,
like the Dynagrow?
I think there is a Dynagrow one. I just use like a standard fertilizer, and I don't even know if it's all that effective. Nick, you can chime in there, but
I see Bree.
Is she there?
I see her peeking. I see her peeking. She's peeking around. Hey,
what's up?
She's busy. She's working, Mike.
Yeah, she's building
working
tanks
in the room.
There you
go.
She's
building tanks.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of the basics, which is good. I do want to mix in some Arid talk, just because I know there's some Arid people listening that are probably like, please tell me something. So maybe we'll mix in just a little bit now, because I do want to get into Microfauna as well. We'll do that next. But as far as Arid goes, are there any of the tips? Obviously, substrate probably is one thing that would differ, but what else would differ from an Arid substrate? Or not an Arid substrate, Arid tips as far as the basics go. So maybe, Nick, did you want to start? I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add to it.
Yeah, for that, you'd want to do like selective watering. because like most of the time in your tropical setups, you're going to be misting down the entire tank and everything's going to be getting soaked. Well, with arid stuff, especially if you have like really desert loving species of lizards or whatnot that don't need to be like blasted with water, it's going to be a lot more beneficial if you just spot water the plant in the corner, because they're going to need a lot more water in that setup too, because you're basically just, you have a hot box where it's going to be constantly perspiring, losing water from the heat lamp and the UV lights and all that sort of thing. So giving it a weekly water just in that area is going to be a lot more beneficial.
Okay.
Not just to kind of touch on what Nick said there, and my personal philosophy with a lot of the more arid species that we keep. I haven't really looked into like the science behind it, but at least in my head, it makes sense. So I think a lot of arid species we keep dry as a bone, i.e. uromastics, leopard geckos, even that kind of deal, actually would benefit from a little bit higher humidity, or at least a like a humid hide, essentially. Because you think about it, if they dig into the corner of a mountain and they're defecating in that area, that will raise the humidity. And I know that Dave Kaufman made a video of him looking at Ackie monitors in the wild, and he's holding the humidity probe out here, and it's like 13% humidity. And then he finds like a hole, basically like an Ackie burrow, and like digs a couple inches into it and sticks it in there, and it's like 90% humidity. Yeah. So I think it is important to raise that. Like and how that relates to Nick is that I actually just water my entire tank, like my entire leopard gecko tank as a whole. And yeah, it kicks up the humidity for 3-4 days, but then it kind of levels off down to the 30-40%, whatever it levels off to. But definitely Nick has a good point in watering. As far as substrate tips go, I personally use the Arcadia Earth Mix Arid. I know there are other options, and you actually can't find that in the States. So there are other options. You just want to make sure it drains really well. Peat moss sand mix is typically okay. You can mix in some like worm castings as well if you want to add some nutrients and such. As far as plant choice goes, you're going to really want to stick to succulents and arid like conditions. You don't want to throw pothos might not go in there.
Yeah.
Just because of the heat and water loss basically. So that's one thing that you really want to consider. There are a lot of really robust growing succulent like plants. Even some peperomias do okay in are very like succulent like. So that's basically just go to the succulent section, and anything you like, try it out. Yeah. I don't have any specific species off the top of my head, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that is good. I think you're right about you reading those just general humidities of those areas and thinking, oh, it's only 12% or 20% here. That means that everything has to be dry. And I think Beardy Vet did something as well, where he went and kind of dug a hole and found like 85% humidity. And maybe we were talking about that before, Nick, I forget. But yeah, so it is important to have those ecological niches or environmental niches. I assume, Troy, you probably don't have much to say on the arid side. No.
Nothing.
Like, what is a reptile?
Yeah.
Hey, I have one, man.
What do you
Did
have?
you get a morning gecko slipped in your tank?
Hold on a second. It's a Gonatodes something.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I don't know.
That's like a rare micro gecko. So
is it?
I've not heard of that.
It's like the yellow-headed one, I think.
Yeah, Gonatodes. I'll find the species name.
Yeah, my buddy in Cleveland, I brought some frogs up to him, and he was like, "Hey, I packed this up for you." I was getting some. He works at just don't worry about it. But he had something I was picking up, and I can't really say. But he was like, "Here, I packed this for you." And I was like, "Oh, what's this?" And he's like, "It's a lizard." And I was like, "Oh God, okay." And everyone's gonna make fun of me now because I've always said I'll never have a reptile.
Yeah. Common name is the yellow-headed gecko, and the species is Gonatodes albogularis. And here, for those of you watching, I'll try and my best to show like a little picture of it. Oh, over here. Nope.
You did something.
Mine doesn't look like that yet because it's like really young.
There. Oh wow, that's amazing! I've never seen that. It's like a blue gecko with an orange or reddish head.
Yeah.
And
So
mine
is
doesn't
it
look like
cohabbed
that
with dart frogs or?
Yeah, I've got it in with my Oyapock Tinctorius.
Okay.
I've seen it maybe I thought I killed it for sure. But I saw it last week. I've only I've only ever seen him at night, right before I'm lights are basically out, and I'm just going around checking stuff, and I'm like, oh, hey, there you are. He's just always up top. And I talked to the guy I got it from. He's like, yeah, that's pretty much the only time I see mine too. So
cool.
And mine's just a juvenile. It's very small. So. But yeah, I've got a reptile, so that's all I can say about reptiles.
That you have one.
Okay. I have.
So let's jump into microfauna, and I think before we get into the cool, and I'm gonna throw in. Oh, did we lose Nick for a second? Oh, he's back. He froze on my side, and I want to throw into fungi, mushrooms in here as well, Nick. So we'll fold this into microfauna because I know that's something you want to talk about. Before we get into the cool stuff, let's talk about the really annoying hitchhikers. Fungus gnats being the biggest one, and this was something that I regrettably didn't ask Nick about when I had him on the podcast last time, and I think we all suffer from this. Everybody listening to this who has tropical plants probably. Is there any solution to this, or is it just something we have to live with, these really annoying tiny little flies that just pester us forever? So maybe Nick, did you want to jump on that first, and then we'll kind of go around?
Yeah, so they are hard to get rid of. They thrive off of moisture, and the fungus gnats larvae actually feed on plant roots. And basically the easiest way to get rid of them is to dry out the tank as much as you can. And then I've had it where they've just kind of petered off and they're no longer existent in the tank. Another way you can do it is if you it's more beneficial if you have micro geckos or dart frogs. They'll feed on them occasionally. Yep. But other than that, you're kind of stuck with them unless you kind of nip it in the butt as soon as you have confirmation that they're there.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe a little micro gecko cohab into some of these setups would be a huge. I find that when I first set up an enclosure, there's a big bloom and it does kind of fade away. But there's 3 months where it's just my wife is just about to kill me. They're all over the place. They get into your cup when you're drinking. It's just horrible. And Mike, what about you?
So similar experience, as some people, if you've tuned in, I moved in with my girlfriend's parents, and we now have a lot of houseplants, and there is a huge problem with the fungus gnats, and same deal. It's getting in their wine, getting in my coffee, they're everywhere. If it's not in a tank setting, or if the tank is empty, you're kind of waiting for the I guess the new tank syndrome to kind of fade away, then you can use, I've heard, I haven't actually tried it yet because we don't have any more right now, but I've heard that you can use the mosquito bites and dilute it in water and then water through that, and it kills the larva. So you might have to do that a couple times just to make sure all the larvae are dead and the adults are also dead.
Is that a pesticide or mosquito bites? Is that what that is?
Yeah, it's used for ponds and stuff. So it basically just kills the larva in ponds. But pardon me, mosquito dunks is what they're called.
Oh, dunks.
And then you can use that. You can also, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's also predatory mites that eat the larva too.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yes.
What's the name?
Is it high slop or haslop? Or
there's hypoaspis mites that are a predatory mite. I don't know if that's the species though.
I think it might be hypoaspis.
Okay,
so are they fruit flies?
Yeah.
Are they attracted to the same type of things fruit flies are?
No,
not as much. No.
Yeah,
it's just they're attracted to yellow. That's why those sticky tape things work really well.
And I actually have those in a few of my tanks. In my turtle tanks, I have that. I used it in my chameleon tank as well when I first set that up. And obviously, make sure it's safe. Make sure your animal can't get to it. Think of the craziest possible way it could get there and move it away.
Yeah.
If there's any way it can get there, it will get there and it will get stuck.
Yeah, because they're so sticky.
Yeah, they're insanely sticky. It is hypoaspis. Okay. Is it hypoaspis miles?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's what I was getting the YL from. Yeah.
Yeah.
And those will kill your cleanup crew as well, though, right? Those will start eating away your springtails and whatnot.
They're generalist mite predators, so anything that they can grab, they're going to kill.
Yeah.
So if you do that, if you release predatory mites in and they take care of the gnat population, they also kill your cleanup crew. Can you eventually reintroduce a cleanup crew and have some success, or are those mites going to be there forever?
You can, but it's going to take probably, because mites will also, they can go dormant if they run out of food and a suspended animation kind of thing. But you'd probably have to wait a few months before trying to reintroduce a cleanup crew. Like, they won't attack isopods, but you're not going to have any springtails left after.
Yeah. Something I did want to mention that came up is the micro geckos and stuff. I have a tank, or I guess a tub full of morning geckos, and they're babies. So they're tiny, tiny, tiny little geckos, and they do not go after the fungus gnats. I've even I'm sure if my dart frog, like my pumilio, came across it, it would eat it, but I still noticed some in her tank as well. So even predators like that might not be savvy enough to catch them. Beyond that, though, I had one other thing to say about the fungus gnats.
My dart frogs eat them.
Yeah, I was going to say, how much of an issue do you have?
Not much. I mean, there's definitely times where a tank will go through like a little bloom, but they don't bother. They seem to just stay in the tank. They never want to come out. And then a week or two later, they're like, I'll see like a couple, and then they're gone. And then they may come back if I reintroduce a new plant or something, or the tank goes through some sort of new cycle. Nothing like my stuff's all automated, but from being out in the garage, the climate change has such an effect on the humidity out here and in the tanks that my tanks, it's a wild cycle they go through, and the seasonal changes compared to when I was in the house. So yeah, I think that may have some effect with the fungus gnats. But yeah, I have times where they're crazy in the tank, and then they just seem to teeter out after a couple of weeks. So.
And obviously,
never like a real.
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say, obviously, you're not drying anything out, so I guess the dart frogs are probably eating them. So that definitely helps.
Yeah.
Mike, did you have anything else on that? I kind of no.
It's not coming back to me.
Oh, okay. Are there any other annoying hitchhikers that fungus gnats are the worst? I don't know if there's any other ones that are within that line. You have one?
There is worse.
What?
Thrips.
Way worse.
Oh,
thrips.
Yeah. Thrips.
Yeah. Thrips. Basically
snails.
You think of like common, snails are a really bad one too. Specifically, those are mostly in like dart frog tanks because it is such high humidity. Pardon me?
Greenhouse millipedes are another one.
I have those as well.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, the greenhouse millipedes I can kind of live with because you can control their population really easy. So if anyone has these, they'll kind of explode, but you can just put like a cucumber or a carrot or something and then come back in the morning and it's just like a horrible mess of them. And you can just like over a few days, you can cut the population back really easily. And they are a pretty effective cleanup crew. What's that?
They are.
I was saying namertines are annoying too. Just thought about that.
Yeah.
Are those little worms?
Yeah.
What are those like slimy worm things?
Mike, I called them Nemertians, and you yelled at me and said it's namertines.
Nope, it definitely was not me.
I swear, yes, it was. I said we were playing Fortnite, and I said Nemertians. You were like, the what? And I was like, Nemertians? You're like, you mean namertines? I was like, all right, dude. I don't know. Just like you called Vanzolini, you called him Vanzolini. I was like, what are you talking about, dude? You mean Vanzolini? Yeah. Mike, you definitely corrected me on that. I promise you.
Okay, well, you were right the first time. Good job.
Those are really
can you say it one more time properly, and then whichever way it was supposed to be said, and then describe what it is?
I've always said Nemertians.
Yeah,
Nemertians.
And they're not parasites, are they, Mike?
Aren't they a flatworm?
Yeah, they're technically a flatworm. Yeah.
Yeah, and they will destroy microfauna. They shoot out like a little probe, and they'll fruit flies. So you usually see them on glass at night. They come out on the doors and at the top wherever the flies are sitting, and they'll just pick them off. But they live in the substrate during the day. You'll see them occasionally in the glass during the day. But they will wipe out not so much isopods, but they will wipe out my springtail like populations pretty wildly. And I don't really know how to get rid of them. Again, just naturally, it seems like my tanks go through blooms, and it's normally I usually seem to notice them and snails from leaf litter. If I don't bake my leaf litter or nuke it. I usually soak it in water and then microwave it for like 5 minutes. If I do that, I don't have snail or Nemerdians blooms. But yeah, if I don't do that, then snails are a big problem. I've lost a few dart frogs from eating snails, and I think the snails had nematodes. That's how they were getting them. Yeah, I've lost a couple dart frogs from that. But yeah, snails are a big problem. But snails you can kind of control with bananas and stuff too. If you put a banana in the tank, the snails will go nuts on those.
Yeah,
you just have to get rid of them every day. But
so the flatworm species, it's a terrestrial species of flatworm. When I had them, I think they were from the genus Rhynchodemus, and I think they're like Rhynchodemus sylvatica or something like that. Like it was.
I think that's right.
Yeah. And they won't really harm your frogs or anything like that, from what I know at least, but they will decimate your cleanup crew. They will also eat like fruit flies and stuff like that. Like they're kind of cool in a way, but at the same time, they're kind of unsightly and yeah, gross. So
they're like brown and like pink. I don't even. Yeah, they're just nasty.
If you've had a fish tank,
some cool ones.
Yeah, if you've had a fish tank or specifically like shrimp tanks, especially, there's the planaria flatworm, and they look vaguely similar to those, but they're, like I said, terrestrial. So.
And these are those flatworms that people have probably seen because there's viral videos that go around of them, right? Where they shoot out that creepy looking thing out their head where it's like, a spider web that comes out and then they recoil it back. Like, it's a horrible thing to see. But most people have seen this. I know there's videos going around of them, and that's kind of what we're talking about.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, these ones don't shoot that web out. It's more, what's it?
It's a proboscis.
Yeah, proboscis. And it's basically used like a harpoon. They just pierce whatever they're trying to, and then but they're not. I hate them. I hate those, and then I hate the snails. Those are my two. The snails. Oh God, I hate snails.
Yeah, it becomes when you want certain inhabitants to be in the soil, you realize how difficult it is. That's why people end up going to the sterile side, right? Like you have an environment that's perfect for isopods and springtails. Well, it's perfect for a bunch of things, and So as far as microfauna, maybe Nick, did you want to jump in and just whatever you have to say about microfauna, you can go for it.
Oh, they're really good.
You like them?
I like
good job,
them.
Nick.
Yeah,
they're really good.
I like them.
So I've been collecting different species of springtails, and currently I'm working with one I found in the greenhouse, which is kind of cool. It kind of shifts between black and greenish color, and it's a Phelsoma genus, I believe, similar to your Phelsoma canidids, which are the temperate white ones. And then prior to that, I started culturing I just called them peach springtails. I found them on a coconut plant that I was growing, and they do really well in the heat. And I'm pretty sure Green Oasis, I traded him for some, and he's producing a ton now, but they're really great at breaking down animal waste to make it available to plant roots, which is quite handy.
Creations of bioactivity.
Bioactive. No. This is bioactive. The whole talk about bioactive, what you guys love.
No.
Yeah, we all love it.
What about
bioactive?
Mike, do you have any cleanup crew critters that you like?
I mean, standard, like springtails, isopods, that kind of deal. Yeah. Like you mentioned, the millipedes actually are a really good cleanup crew.
They do eat everything, yeah.
They do.
I don't remove them when I see them.
And then beyond that, though,
mealworms work.
Yeah, mealworms work well. There's a lot of different stuff that works, but even in if you don't set up a bioactive tank or with a cleanup crew, I guess I should say, and you just have a plant or two and even no plants, there are a lot of times in just the soil that you use, coconut core, whatever. A lot of times there are little, I don't know what they are actually, but they're just little black insects of some kind that
those
don't seem.
Springtails.
Those are springtails?
Mhm.
Okay, so yeah.
It's
I
a
mean, I have
dwarf
those.
silver species.
Just the little chrome ones too. I get in my tanks just show up. They're really cool.
Yeah, they
They're like
just
that
pop
blue,
up.
like shiny blue chrome ones.
Yeah.
Those are neat.
Yeah, I always
Well,
have
there's
the
a lot
little
of
black
different
ones.
stuff.
I've never seeded a tank ever, and I just count on them to eventually show up, and they always do.
Yep, always.
They follow through every time.
I can't remember the last time I seeded a tank, and every time I go in, I like look under the leaf litter. It's all kinds of little bugs. I'm just like, yeah, cool, bioactive, man.
I just remember when Troy sent us a picture of like a Montenegro isopod in one of his Dart Frog tanks. He's like, yeah, I just got these, so I just threw them in my tank. And I'm like, Troy, those are like $30 an isopod or something silly. He's
Well,
like, whatever, man, they do their job.
Well, so that whole story, some guy messaged me on Instagram like, hey, do you want isopods? I'm like, what? He's like, I'm selling isopods. Do you want any? I'm like, I don't know, dude. Okay. He's like, yeah, I can get you some orange ones and then some powder blues. And I'm like, dude, I don't know what you're talking about, but all right, cool. How much do you want me to send you? He's like, $50. I'm like, okay. So I sent him $50. And then like, this was during the winter time and it went on for like 2-3 months. He kept saying, bro, I'm going to send them. I'm like, I'm not even messaging you, like asking about them. So dude, take your time. And he's like, I'm going to hook you up. I'm like, okay, cool. Like whatever. I don't care about isopods, but I'm just like trying to help somebody out. So, and then when it came down, he's like, all right, I'm ready to ship. I was like, all right, cool. Here's my address. We shipped them out. And I got all kinds of stuff. There were orange isopods. There was like Dalmatians. There was albinos, clowns, and all these like, I was just like, cool, man. He hooked it up. So I just like threw the whole containers in tanks. And then he messages me later that day. He's like, bro, did you get the package? I was like, yeah. He's like, what was in it? I was like, I don't know, a bunch of different types of isopods. He's like, was it the ones like clowns? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, oh, dude, that was like a $400 shipment. It was supposed to go to somebody else. I was like, I can't get them back now. I just emptied them in the tank. And he's like, oh, dude. I was like, dude, I'll send you like more money to make it better. I'm sorry. Like, I didn't like read the labels. I just threw them, like, I don't care about isopods. He was super bummed. So he sent somebody that was supposed to get like a $400 shipment, just
Powder
a ton
blues.
of orange. Yeah. And I was like, dude, I don't know. There were powder blues in here and there were oranges. You kept saying you were going to hook it up. So he's like, but you don't know like albinos. And I'm like, no, I'm a frog guy. Like, I don't collect isopods. Like,
You're like, I think I've seen these outside.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I treat it. Like,
These are roly-polies to me.
these are those
Yeah.
pill bugs, dude. Yeah, I mean, I understand the collectability of the isopods to a certain extent, but like when people like rubber duckies and all these things that are getting like $60-$80 for a bug, I'm like, what is going on in the world? I'm struggling to sell this amazing looking yellowback Tinctorius for $40, and people are dying to get these rubber ducky bugs that burrow in the ground. Like, what is going on? It drives me nuts. But yeah, so whatever. I'm not into the culturing aspect of the microfauna. I mean, I have springtails and that's it. That's the only thing I blow in the tanks occasionally for baby Bufaga. But other than that, all my tanks just have microfauna in it, and a lot of them I didn't put there. It's just, they just show up. So, yeah.
Does anyone culture isopods here? I did once and then I kind of gave up. You do, Mike?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you keep? Just a bunch of different ones?
Yeah, so I got like kind of all the ones that Troy mentioned. I have like powder blues, powder oranges, Dalmatians, dairy cows. Yep, dairy cows. I do have the Montenegro or the clown isopods. Nothing.
Why are
like,
those cool? Why are they cool?
like? I mean, the short answer is they're not. Like,
Okay.
They're
It's a morph.
cool to look at and they're interesting. Like,
Colorful bugs.
yeah, they're colorful. That's basically the only appeal that they have to them. I mean,
Ladybugs
when I was
are
here over the summer, yeah, exactly. When I was here over the summer, I mean, I had a lot more and like some of the more expensive ones too. And I basically came back to like dry, crusty bins when I came home. My mom's like, well, you didn't tell me to do anything. I was like, Mom, that's like $600 on bugs. And she was like, why?
Yes.
And I was like, okay,
Yes,
well,
Mom.
that's just kind of my like exit from the hobby or whatever. You know, I culture the like super common or the dwarf whites too, dwarf purples. Like I culture
That's
the
all I
really
use.
common ones and the useful ones. And then the Montenegros I just have because they're cool. Like they look interesting, but I'm not sitting there every day like, wow, these are so neat. It's like, I haven't fed the isopods in 3 weeks. Like, I'll throw in a fish.
Do you think the hype's going to like die down on them eventually?
I don't know, because there's more and more always being found. So I think it's just going to become like, it'll be a Troy scenario of like, oh yeah, throw your Montenegros in the tank. And like,
that's what I do.
That's what they do. They'll live, they'll breed, they'll produce, but you know, they're more functional than pretty. Yeah. So do
you think the plant game's gonna lose some hype eventually?
No,
I don't know. I don't think so. There's more and more coming out, and Nick would know.
Profits from the nursery.
Yeah, Nick would know much better than I.
It's not dying anytime soon.
Yeah,
especially last year, everyone's at home. Everybody wants a plant because they're locked in your house. It's like, people just killed plants all over the place last year. But as far as those expensive isopods, are people keeping them and not using them as a cleanup crew, and they're keeping them?
Yeah.
They are,
yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I had no idea.
Like my buddy,
bugs.
My buddy Dion has I don't know how many he still has right now, but he had something like 35 different species / colors / whatever you want to call them. And now that there's all these ones from Asia being imported, like the Armadillidium, or what are the
Cubaris?
Yeah, the Cubaris
a bunch of Brazilian species too.
Yeah, like there's a bunch of ones out there that are just absurdly like $100 for one.
Wow.
Not a culture, one.
Damn, I can get into this.
Yeah, right. Come on, Dylan, get some money.
I mean, I know Alex from Frog Daddy, like the majority of their business is isopods and plants.
Yep.
That's the majority. That's like they make a ton of money through that.
And for a place like that, like for a place that is mostly dart frog breeding, you have to diversify, and you have to have those regular customers that come for every week for fruit fly cultures because they don't want to make them, or they're setting up a new tank, so they want to get 30 plants or whatever. You got to have that kind of stuff, like return customers.
That's why Rizzo, he got out of frogs. I mean, like frogs, it seems like the dart frogs gets people into wanting to make it a business, and then they shortly realize like it's very hard to make a business out of selling the actual animals.
Yeah.
It's the the materials, dry goods, bugs.
Which is true for every like animal related business. I mean, when you could sell dogs in pet stores in Canada, yeah, sure, they'd sell for $2,000-$3,000, whatever. But that's a one-time cost that, that person will buy a $2,000 dog and have it for 12 years. But it's the recurring $80 dog food that they have to buy every 6 weeks that is the income maker. It's them getting people through the door to look, oh yeah, I need dog food. Ah, crap, I needed a toy too, like it's his birthday next week or whatever. So
yeah, I mean, that's where I'm always critical of especially on the reptile side with the ball python trade, is like people really assume that you can just make a business selling animals, and it's a lot harder than you think. And I would rather people have different types of isopods than different types of ball python morphs. I feel like that's maybe a little bit more ethical.
Probably more profitable too.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like they're kept similarly
it's
too.
It's the exact same care.
Yeah. Throw them in a tub, keep them warm and humid, and you're good.
Yeah, exactly. So let's dive into a little bit of fungi and mushrooms. And I have no clue about this at all, besides the ones that I would randomly see pop up. Yeah, Nick, let it go.
I'm in it too. I'm versed in fungi as well. So
you're gonna have you got your fungus that break down nutrients, and then you got your fungus that just kind of steal nutrients, but they serve a really good purpose. So like the first kind you're gonna see in not 90%, but you're going to see these yellow mushrooms that are going to pop up out of the dirt. And now that's a flower pot fungus. Pretty much if you use coconut coir, it's going to pop up if it's moist and warm in there. And they basically, their sole purpose is to just break down as much nutrients as possible that's in the substrate, and then reproduce, make the mushroom, and then die. And they don't really do anything other than that. I haven't seen too much benefit from them other than the fact that it's like, oh, cool, mushroom. Now, the other type are called, it's like a symbiosis. These are mycorrhizae and trichoderma fungi. And their whole purpose is they connect to a plant root and then they'll actually send out filaments into the substrate, which allows for extraction of different nutrients that the plant can't grab itself, whether it be for the pH is too high for the plant, but it's available to the fungus, or vice versa, and then the plant in turn feeds it by giving it sugars and carbohydrates to keep growing.
Yeah, and so the most common one is the arbuscular fungus. Is that it's like an A? It's shorthand. It's like AM fungus.
Yeah,
that's the most it's the oldest, like most diverse, I guess, class of fungi, and it does literally like integrate with the root of the plant. And how it works is some of them will excrete like enzymes and such like that to actually like degrade wood and stuff like that to actually bring the nutrients back to the plant. And the hyphae, or the like filaments that Nick was saying, basically extend. Nick will probably know more about this than I do, but like essentially a root will cause like a depletion zone. So it'll use up the nutrients in a given area. And, you know, you're not looking at a root and it's going like a worm trying to find everything. It takes time to move and grow towards nutrients. But the nice thing about the hyphae, or the fungi filaments, is that it extends past that nutrient zone and takes nutrients from that area and brings it to the plant. So that's essentially, it just makes for healthier plants.
So does that look like a mushroom? Like, is it a mushroom that comes up through the soil?
No.
So there's two different kind of, there's a fruiting body, which is the mushroom. Nick, that's correct. Yeah.
Yep.
There's the fruiting body, which is the mushroom, and that will release the spores and kind of continue the propagation of the fungus elsewhere. And then there's the hyphae, or the essentially the part that you don't see, and that's the stuff that stays in the ground that connects things. Like fungus is a whole insanely cool, interesting topic, because like I took one class about fungus and kind of associations with plants and stuff, and it essentially allows communication between different trees via fungus. It's called a common mycorrhizal network. Yeah. So it's like there's just so many.
They can even transfer nutrients between the trees because of it.
Yeah.
So how does someone go about incorporating this into a Viv?
So I've used it in pretty much all the setup Vivs. I've used a mix of trichoderma and mycorrhizae, because they both they'll choose certain species to actually form a symbiosis with, because not all are compatible. But you can buy these online. A lot of organic garden growing websites will sell it, and you just mix it up with dechlorinated water, and then you water it into your substrate. And I believe there are a few companies now, I think Josh's Frogs mixed in with fertilizer, and then you just sprinkle it in, and then it's basically just a mix of either of those two, most likely mycorrhizae, because it's easier to farm.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure like the bioshots are just mycorrhizae and a little bit of fertilizer, but you can source your own, like Nick said, very easily for much cheaper.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, and then that species doesn't have a fruiting body, is what you're saying. So you'll never see.
No. So
are there some? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, a lot of the mycorrhizae, the plant actually needs to die in order for the fungus to then produce spores. And it's generally just around the root zone. So if the plant, they'll just wait in the ground for another root to grow by, and then they'll wake up essentially and then start off.
Cool. That is fascinating. Is there anything else that we wanted to add about fungi before we moved on?
Highly recommend it. Like, you're going to see 10 times the amount of growth from your plant if you don't, or if you have it, opposed to not having it. Like, you can even look up online where they've done like studies. You'll see two patches which are like 10 feet apart. One was watered in with a mycorrhizae, the other one wasn't. You'll see the plant's 3 times the size.
Wow. That's amazing.
And there's a lot of like super cool, not so much for Vivs and stuff, but when I was in that class, there's a lot of like benefits to the fungus in like antibacterial properties, other fungal properties as well. There's a lot of, I mean, if you're a listener listening to this, look into it. I mean, it's a whole thing where you can go into scientific papers and see all the really cool research that goes on with it. They've even found, I think, one species when I was researching it that of bromeliad that goes off of fungal association, essentially. Like a lot of bromeliads, as you may or may not know, take up the nutrients primarily from the actual pod itself. The roots are basically just structural to anchor it to something. But in the paper that I was reading in South America, they found one species that had a very loose fungal association. So they thought that potentially it was actually getting nutrients from said fungus rather than just in the little ponds that form in the bromeliads. So.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, that is, I think, a huge tip for people. I think a lot of people don't even realize. Actually, I put that BioShot in this one enclosure that I had years ago, and I didn't even realize that that's what it was. I just thought it was great, and I thought it was just something that you put in, and it was. I didn't realize that it was a fungus. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so we're like an hour and 40 in. We haven't really talked about plants yet, but you can see how complicated these topics are. There's so many threads and things to.
We've been going for that long.
That's a really good foundation.
Doesn't feel like it.
I know it flies by, but these are those topics. This is why, the hobby is a complicated thing, and people now, they want the 10-second TikTok to tell you how to, make sure everything, have success on everything. It's like, well, look, we got to talk for an hour and a half.
With a plant on my butt.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would like that TikTok, Troy.
Yeah, that's
subbed for sure.
Yeah. So it is tough to, you got to flesh out the conversation before we get into things. But now I think we have. So let's talk about some plants. And first thing I think I've noticed about everybody here is the species diversity is huge across what you guys are doing. And I think that's what really makes an enclosure look amazing. It's not like two species that are growing. It's, there's 10, 12 different species, and it just looks amazing. And most of us, just like we've kind of been joking about pothos, but that's like the only plant that most of us use, pothos or ficus and things like that. Or, Nick had listed a few that are just the common greenhouse plants that many of us just gravitate towards. And I think that just doesn't make an enclosure look great. It's using these small creeping plants and just all these different accents. So the first question I have is, where do you get your plants? And since we both have, this is an international conversation here, maybe we'll start with Troy. Where do you get your plants? And that way the American listeners can I just say something
really quick?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Sorry, Troy, but
no, you're good.
This is just an introduction for those of you that are just kind of getting into it. Keep in mind that this is not where you have to start. What Dylan said, and the pothos and Phytonia or whatever, like that is perfectly fine getting into the hobby. Like you're going to notice, and I know Troy will say it and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, but the price of the plants that we are putting in these enclosures are now even higher than when Troy first built his stuff a while ago. But you're going to be spending like $100 on a plant, or 80, or 100, like 300 you can even go up to. So if you're just starting off, it's okay to keep pothos, get your kind of feet under you and start marching and slowly upgrade.
Yeah. That's so true. Don't go murder your $1,000 isopods and your $1,000 plant. It's all new.
Yeah,
No,
I agree with that. I'd say it's best to not get those expensive plants, on your first couple vivariums. I mean, once you understand how to get the actual enclosure right for the plant growth, then maybe it's like, all right, try an expensive plant here and see how you do. And, you'd probably be successful dart frog keeping. But I agree with Mike. I mean, it's okay. And there are some really cool, cheap plants.
Yep.
And they're not cheap because the way they look, they're cheaper because they're more common and they are so easy to grow. But there are, like Ficus Pamela looks cool for a month or two. And then it's just like, get out of here. I hate it. And I mean, some people like nerve plant, Phytonia. I absolutely hate. I don't like the way it looks. I don't think it looks super, like, it doesn't look very natural to me. Although, like Paul Fowler, my buddy who lives in Peru, occasionally he'll come across a little patch, and it is cool, but it's a rare thing to see, and it doesn't overpower the scene he's showing. Where in tanks, it's like it completely can overpower, and I don't like that. But okay, so to answer your question, where do I get my plants? Primarily, a lot of my stuff comes from Mike Rizzo from Glassbox Tropicals. A lot of other hobbyists too. Like if I'm looking for something specific, a lot of the time they just have stuff, and when I'm buying frogs from them, or we do trades. But I would say, as far as like, if I'm looking for a specific plant and a buddy doesn't have it, but where I'm going to trade, I'm going to go to Mike, who Mike is a buddy from Glassbox Tropicals, but I'll usually message him, see what he's got. There's a couple others. There's a guy in Ohio. His name's Larry Snow. He runs, I think, My Green Obsession on Instagram is his tag or his handle. He's got a lot of stuff. He's also friends with Rizzo. Frog Daddy's got a really good selection, and Alex is really reasonable with pricing on a lot of these plants. But I've also, over the years, I've done stuff from eBay. There's a couple bromeliad guys. Michael's bromeliads, I use him for bromeliads. Yeah, there's Tropiflora too down in Florida. So it just depends on what I'm looking for to who I'm going to go to. But yeah, those are my sources that I would use. So.
Cool. And what about our Canadians here, Mike? Maybe you can start.
So for me, I have to plug myself. I am trying to start getting more plants up for sale as well. You knew it was coming, Troy. Come on.
Okay.
But a lot of my plants I'll either import or go to other hobbyists, like Troy said. Obviously up here we have Understory Enterprises, which is kind of one of the founders of the Dart Frog hobby, and they have a lot of cool plants. He has a plot in Peru that he's able to export plants from and stuff like that, and a lot of stuff comes from there. And he has a very weird small philodendrons that you can't find anywhere else. Lots of random stuff like that. For more like commercial stuff, if you're in Ontario, there's a couple greenhouses. Vandermeer Nursery has a lot of interesting variety that you don't see a lot of other places. There's Kim's Nature in Markham that has a lot of savvy plants, I suppose. They have some microsorum, they have different orchids, smaller orchids. They have a lot of cool stuff there, so that they're primarily on Instagram, Kim's Nature. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot else. And hobbyists, friends, hobbyists, other Instagram accounts, that kind of deal. Yeah.
Nick, is there anything else to add to that list?
Yeah, I'd say with Canada, it's getting a lot better now, but basically anywhere you see something cool is where I get my plants. I've even gotten some what are very hot plants right now from Walmart.
Nice.
I got the original Epiphytes blue before it was a thing, and now it's selling for $30 for a 2-node plant.
Is that what that Cebu blue? Is that the same thing?
Yeah, Cebu blue. Yeah, but again, Understory, so they're really good. They've got.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, yeah. I've Understory, other hobbyists, a lot of these little boutique niche flower shop houseplant stores. They'll get stuff, and then Mike Tytula, who imports stuff.
Wow, double plug.
Hit me up on Instagram.
Dang.
To caution that though, blew out. Right. To caution that though, if you're in, if you're buying from Walmart, Nick is very experienced. Keep in mind that a lot of plants that come from big box stores have tons of pests. That's how we got a lot of the pests that we have right now. Is Bree's sister brought in a plant from Walmart, and it had the whole gamut: spider mites. It had mealybugs. It had everything imaginable. Literally, this was right before winter, so winter, the plants were starting to shut down for winter time.
Sterilize it, Mike?
No, it couldn't. I didn't even know it was in the house.
With a biology major, and you should.
Oh no, I sterilized it. I threw it outside at -30. So, yeah.
Okay.
Sterilized all the fire.
Yeah.
Take it out of that substrate, and you gotta clean that. 10% bleach solution, bro.
Yep. Yeah. So
Yeah, that is something. I mean, there's some really annoying pests that can come off, and if anyone wants to
Thrips
listen to, thrips and the mealy bugs are so horrible. And in the episode that I had Nick on, if anyone wants, they can go back and listen to some quarantine procedures because we did go over that. And if you find a good deal at Walmart, you're definitely going to want to keep it in a separate room for months and do your quarantine because it is so annoying. Any of those pests, they're really difficult to get rid of. Okay, so I think that lays out a good foundation for where people can get plants. And I think what we'll do is feel free to continue to list plants as they come to your head, but don't feel like you need to list everything you've ever used because that's for people listening. It's not going to be that helpful just listening to random species of plants. So that's where I think the list will come in, and we'll compile that list. So people listening, if you don't know what they're talking about, don't worry. We'll make sure that there's a list that you can go back and take a look at what species. But I wanted to kind of focus on a few different areas of types of plants, and the first one I thought would be creeping plants, and I think that's one area which that really makes an enclosure look nice when you have plants creeping. So what are some of the favorite creeping plants, and also how are you planting them to make them successfully creeping, if that's a question I can ask? So maybe we'll start with Troy.
Okay. So for creepers, I generally use Markravia a lot. And, I guess for beginners, I would say look for like Markravia rectiflora. Grows really fast and really crazy. Also, like Markravia cernam grows pretty quickly. It looks very similar. Just rectiflora seems to get a little bigger. I don't use either of those anymore because eventually it takes longer than say a Ficus pumila, but it does the same thing. It grows to the top, and then when they have nowhere to go, then they start becoming a bush, and it just takes up so much space. So I don't use those anymore. But to plant those, all my vines I pretty much plant the same. If you're planting it on, like, say, a lot of people I've seen lately have been adopting my the dry lock method I do, and if you're going to be doing that, it's if you just go to, and you don't rinse the dry lock very well, there is some sort of residue on it, and you're going to get, the leaves are going to brown, they're going to die. The plant's not dead; it will eventually grow new growth, but if you don't want that to happen, rinse it very well. And then even then I get a little bit of sphagnum moss, and I will just a very thin, like little strip of it, lay it on the background, and then put the Markravia on top of that. And then I just use two toothpicks, and basically make an X to pin it up. You can also use super glue. If you want to use super glue, a tiny bit of super glue to the sphagnum moss to the plant will work as well. So I do that with all my vines, and primarily like I say, the only vines I'm using are Markravias mainly. And for like what I particularly like are like the umbellata species, Centennici. Centennici is my favorite. It's slow and it's really big, and it just looks elegant, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense, but it just looks really nice. And it like I say, it takes a while. The umbellatas are smaller and they're a little slower too. And there's like a red umbellata. Mendez is one I use. Those are all like the Markravias that I personally use. But then I also use peperomias too, which the ones I tend to use, one is like a vine and it's a creeper, and it's serpens, peperomia serpens I use a lot. And it stays kind of smaller, but then also you get some leaves that get bigger, which is nice. You just get a variety of size with that. And then I use a marginella. A marginella is my favorite peperomia I use. It's super tiny. And it looks really cool, like draped across, if you see it will creep too, and but it drapes. So it creeps and then it goes downward. So it looks really cool on protruding pieces of wood. It kind of cascades down and creates a lot of depth there, because you'll see that up front, and then behind it you can see the Markravia, or if I've got like the Veracosum I use a lot. I use the small version, or the mini they call it. So I use that a lot, and you'll see that behind. It creates a lot of depth with the cascading plant. That's like the marginella that I use. So I would say for vines, I'm trying to think if there's any I'm missing. That's really the only vines I use are peperomia and Markravia. I'm done with ficus. So you will not find that in any tanks anymore.
Those days are over.
Long gone. Even the quercifolia, which is like the oak leaf ficus. It's slower, but like I completely ripped it out of my green Stapolowini tank. It took 4 years, but eventually it does what all ficus does, and it completely chokes out any other plant, and you're just left with just giant bush of. I mean, I ripped it. I had like a 13-gallon trash bag full of it, and I asked like one friend. I was like, "Hey, do you want this?" Like, no. I'm like, I haven't pitched it. I just pitched it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's probably a ton of money worth of plants that you could sell individually, cuttings, but it's like I'm not into that. I'm not a business. I'm a hobby. So, or I'm a hobbyist, I should say. But I'm just looking around at the tanks right now to see if I'm missing any. I have that Cebu Blue. I guess that's considered a vine. But like I said, that's on the list of probably not going to be using it much longer because it just gets crazy and I throw it out. Yeah, that's all I can think of right now. Oh, I do like I forgot to mention, is it Solanum Ecuador? I really like that plant. It's a really easy grower. It's fast, but it doesn't get crazy. Like it doesn't, I guess it's hard to explain. It grows fast and easy, but the leaves stay small and it doesn't send out as many runners, I guess, as the Markgravias do, and some of the other vines. So I do like that as well. I'll throw that name in there. But yeah, that's what I'm going to use for vine. I'll throw it to one of these guys and see if they agree or what they can add to the.
Yeah, Nick, did you want to add anything to that?
Completely agree with the Marginella. Definitely one of my favorites out there. I really like also Peperomia scandens. That's more of you can find the variegated one relatively easy. The green ones are a bit more hard to find, but if you want to have a pothos, but not actually have a pothos sort of plant, because it doesn't grow as crazy, but it still looks really nice when it starts vining. Another one would be Begonia thelmae. It's technically not a vine, but it's relatively available. It will kind of creep over whatever surface you got. You're going to find it a weed eventually and have to butcher it, but it'll grow back fine. And then another cheap vine I've heard called the poor man's I can't remember, but Polonias. Polonias are definitely a good one if you're not looking to spend a whole lot, but
yeah, there's Polonia pulchra, which is like the watermelon vine.
Yeah, and then
there's Polonia serpens. Is that the other one?
I think it's repens.
Repens, yeah.
Yeah, those ones are good. And then the Epiphytes canatum Cebu Blue, which is expensive. That one's fun. It's a pothos, so it's going to grow like nuts. And you're not going to get mature leaves in a tank unless you allow it to stay straight, but you're going to need a house-sized tank for that to happen. So it's a nice plant, though. It's a nice plant.
Yeah, cool. It is. It looks good.
And Mike, did you have any other ones that you wanted to throw on that?
If we're going for kind of just like the vining aspect of it, there is another Solanum, the Eulanum purple. It's like a really weird,
really cool.
Yeah, it's a really cool plant. Like
it grows like the little is that the one that grows like the little almost like a bush kind of?
Yeah. It grows super interesting. Like it has a really interesting leaf shape and habit to it. So that's nice. It's definitely not common. It's not a super common plant at all, but it is a really cool, and it just adds, like, if you're looking for something that'll grow up the background that isn't a standard kind of green leaf flat against the background shingler, then it's a good option. Speaking of shinglers, there's also Monstera dubia. There's
there's some Rhitophoras that are cool.
Yeah. Rhitophoras that are really nice too. Cryptantha, yep.
Cryptantha is really nice.
If you guys are, when's this coming out, Dylan?
This will be out in a couple weeks, probably.
Couple weeks?
Yeah, at least 2 weeks, probably.
Okay, so chances are, if you're listening to this and you're in Ontario, you're probably too late. But Vandermeer Nursery has like 10-inch stake dubia right now for like $70 or something. So believe it or not, that is dirt cheap for that plant. And if you're interested in growing it, then that's definitely, I kind of regret not buying it. I was like, nah, not today. And then I was like,
cheap. Yeah. Mike, you would buy that for 70 and sell it for like 400, right?
Exactly.
Unbelievable. You're an unbelievable human.
That's sick.
That's Mike. That's Mike's prices.
Well, it is crazy how
I'm lower than most people now.
That's good.
I was ahead of the times, and now I'm below the times. We're good, Troy.
You're undercutting.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's good. So I think that's some good lists of climbing plants, and there's a few other things I want to touch on. One is planting tips for planting epiphytes, and Troy, you kind of touched on it with the super glue as far as your bromeliads and any other air plants and whatnot. What do you suggest as far as making them stick onto driftwood or onto the background? What are you doing? Are you using twine or super glue or whatever?
So yeah, it's either super glue if you want it to stick to the wood or the background. Yeah, either super glue, the super glue gel, because I use the Gorilla Glue super glue gel. I use zip ties, black zip ties, and just kind of what I'll even do on those is if it's like a really heavy bromeliad, sometimes the super glue just doesn't want to support it. So I will do multiple black zip ties, and then I cover the zip ties in super glue, and then cover those in live moss. And that tends to look pretty cool. I don't only super glue like bromeliads or zip tie bromeliads. I do a lot of orchids. I super glue to the wood, and even like a lot of the philodendrons and anthuriums. I'll use the super glue method on those as well.
So you just take a small dab of glue and then just stick the stem somewhere, and then you're good to go.
So what I typically do is, like, if I'm doing orchids or aroids, I'll take like a little, I'll put a little dab on the actual wood, and then I will do dry sphagnum moss onto that, and then so that creates like some sort of base, and then I do another dab of super glue on the sphagnum moss, and then put the plant onto that. So that creates like a multiple. You know, if it's a heavier plant and it still wants to sag, then sometimes I'll even I'll take a little like bit of more moss and put like a strip of the glue, and then pretty much almost using it like a piece of tape, but it's moss with glue. Well, and also if I'm doing stuff into the background, like I mentioned on earlier, the sharp end double-sided toothpicks are one of my best friends. I use them for they're perfect. It just literally any vining plant that as well if you want to climb in a certain direction, you can just pin it in certain points. And then I do trim off the pointy ends because my frogs are delicate, so I don't want them to scrape their little bellies.
You don't want to skewer a frog, Troy?
Don't want to skewer. And you only really need to keep the toothpicks in for a couple weeks. I mean, those roots grow so fast and you can pull them out, or leave them in and whatever you want to do. But yeah, those are my ways of planting any aphidic plants. My favorite, I would say, is that glue, just because it's so clean and you just don't have to do anything. But your fingers aren't clean unless you wear gloves. That's also, I do want to touch on the super glue trick with the cotton balls. Be very careful. I basically burned. It's just healing now, but it's like healed.
Can you describe what that is for people who aren't aware of what you're talking about? Describe what that is, and then describe why super glue and cotton balls is dangerous.
So there's a chemical reaction that happens with a little bit of just 100% cotton balls or cotton. I know some people use like the cotton from a cigarette filter, and you put it in the crevice wherever you're trying to create some sort of bond, and then the super glue on top of that. There's a chemical reaction that happens in it. That cotton and the glue hardens and it bonds two things together, and it creates a large amount of heat. And if you're not careful, and you want to use some sort of tool when you're trying to, pat the glue and the cotton down. If you use your fingers, I basically burnt like 2 holes in my fingers. Like I was screaming in the ground. Like it was excruciating, and I couldn't do anything because the glue was stuck there. Like, ah! And I'm trying to pull it apart, and it was just burning. And then I tried to like peel it off, and it got on these hands. I'm just like, ah! Like running around the garage. My hands were just burning. So definitely wear nitrile gloves, and even wearing gloves, I would still think it could probably burn through that.
Yeah.
So it's best to wear gloves and then use some sort of tool, a metal tool, a smooth edged metal tool, or even toothpicks would work, I would think, as well. Yeah, definitely be careful working with super glue, because the chemical reaction happens is hot. So
yeah. And obviously you wouldn't do that for like binding a plant to a piece of wood, but you're talking like, taking two pieces of driftwood or connecting it to the background, patting the cotton in and then dabbing glue on it. It makes a weld, but it gets hot. Yeah. It's a really cool method, but yeah, you gotta be careful.
When
your mileage may vary. I couldn't get it to work, so should have taken chemistry, not biology. Yeah.
The Canadian super glue doesn't seem to have the properties that the
and to kind of go,
or Mike's biology degree is just too smart.
It's possible. It's like we tried probably 8 different kinds of super glue. Like we went out and bought every single kind of super glue that we could find, and we tried it densely packed, lightly packed. We put super glue on first, then put the cotton, then put more cotton, and then more super glue. And then like we tried so many different, and it never smoked. Like it works. It works. It hardens to like, it just hardens, hardens like super glue would.
Was the super glue super runny?
Yeah.
Like very liquidy?
Liquid super glue. Yeah.
Very liquidy?
Very extra liquid super glue.
I don't get it.
I don't know. I can't figure it out, and it was very frustrating. We spent like $50 on different super glue just buying it, because I mean in Canada the price for one bottle is like $12 to $15. So
did you try like real cheap super stuff? Glue.
Yep. Yeah, we use like super cheap, like basically dollar store liquid.
That was the best kind I found. Was at the dollar store. It was like $2. I
just couldn't figure it out. I don't understand.
You'll have to send Mike some super glue, Troy, to see if it's an actual ingredient.
Next time that we're allowed to go across the border, I'm just going to be like, yeah, deal. Next time I'm allowed to go across the border freely, or more or less freely, I will genuinely be buying super gluing and bringing it back. Like I'm not joking,
because it's so much easier than spray foam. The spray foam is such a mess, and then I think the super glue cotton method actually welds it even harder in place. So
yes,
I mean like what Troy did.
I still cover it with great stuff eventually, but you're using less great stuff, and it's a lot. You have so much more control. You're not like working as fast because that's already welded up there for. I did hear that the super glue and that method eventually I heard it loses its strength eventually. Somebody was saying if it's like underwater, but I don't know. My stuff's not underwater, so far the pieces that I used where wood was like making branches, I've had no issues. So, but it's only been a few months.
So. One other thing I wanted to talk about, or a couple other things. One is that Hygrolon method, or Hygrolon material. And as far as I can tell, maybe Nick and Mike will have a better idea. It doesn't seem like that's easily available in Canada, and it's a really, really cool product. And so I guess
Hygrolon.
Maybe what was that? What did I say?
You said Hygrolon.
What is it?
It's
actually?
G, not a D.
You were mixing like the hydroton in the Hygrolon.
It's Hygrolon.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so Hygrolon. So maybe, Troy, you could start with explaining what that is and why it is such a neat product, and then maybe the two Canadians have an idea of how to replicate that effect with what we have here.
I can tell you how to replicate it.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So basically, it's a mesh material. I know Serpa Design calls it like a geotextile fabric or something, but it's like a mesh material, and they sell similar things to it on Amazon. But they call it speaker mesh cover.
Yeah.
And I bought that, and I've sampled both. So the Hygrolon is basically the mesh material double-sided. So if you look on the front of it and look on the back of it, it looks identical, and it's thicker. The speaker mesh stuff is just one side. You only see that mesh pattern on the one side. On the back side, it's just like a flat black kind of even finer mesh, but it doesn't wick up as much material, and that's what the Hygrolon is so good at, I mean, you could not miss the tank, and if you just had a water feature in a tank, like just filtered water and circulating water in the bottom, and as long as you covered the background and that Hygrolon dipped into the water area, it's going to wick up water probably 60 to 75% the way up, and it'll constantly be moist. And it's not waterlogged or soaked; it just constantly stays nice and damp, I would say. So it just wicks up water and it retains water really well. That's why, in the tanks that I've done backgrounds on with the dry lock, and then some people ask me, why do you do dry lock on some? Why do you do Hygrolon on some? It's just like, I just try different stuff all the time, and whatever I've got available, I'm just like, yeah, I'll just throw that on. So there's no real difference of why I'm using it. But I will say, when I use the Hygrolon, the plants grow significantly faster. It fills in way faster, than with the dry lock. But over time, a year and a half down the road, it's the same thing. You're not really going to see a difference. But the speed of the plants growing in on the Hygrolon is the difference.
They carpet over really quick.
Yeah, and so to touch on, I do know how you guys could create that in Canada would be to get that speaker mesh, and you would just have to basically, buy a sewing machine and I would just sew a seam, just sew strips to kind of make it bond together so it's not going to fall apart. But that would be literally the exact thing, same thing as the Hygrolon. So that's what you would do. And I've heard people have used the speaker mesh fine. They haven't had a problem with it. The problem with the way that I have used Hygrolon, that was taught to me to use it, was using Gorilla Glue. And when you use that Gorilla Glue, it's basically great stuff in a different state. It's at a different state, and it doesn't expand. It expands like very little. But when you put that Hygrolon on the Gorilla Glue, a lot of times that Gorilla Glue seeps through. And that's with two-sided Hygrolon. If you're using the speaker mesh, that stuff's going to creep through it like crazy. And I would think that you're going to lose a lot of the wicking properties because it's all going to be taken over by the glue.
And the plants aren't going to root into that.
Correct. Yeah. But if you do use it in a different method, if you're not using it with Gorilla Glue, I guess it could be used with success, I would think. As long as you still if you touch the cloth and it's still dry, felt like cloth and not hardened glue, I would think it'd still work.
So I know you use Gorilla Glue, Troy. Do you attach it a different way now? Or is it still just Gorilla Glue?
I recently redid a tank, and I didn't have any Gorilla Glue on me, but I know Gorilla Glue and Great Stuff are basically the same things, just different states. So what I did last time, this most recent time, is I just put the Great Stuff pond and stone down, and while it was wet, I just pushed the Hygrolon right into it. So
nice.
And it created a bond. It doesn't pull off. So you can that's a very easy way to do it. You don't have, the only problem with that is you're not going to have control of how much it expands. I like to let the foam expand, shave it down, and then I put that. So, that's the disadvantage of that. You're not going to have the control of how much it expands.
Okay.
And then, so Mike, do you do anything to try to have you tried to create that wall of sort of carpeting plant? Like, that's what's so cool about the Hygrolon is that you create this, it's essentially just a carpet, a wall of plants, and it looks like a background that's just completely covered with moss or whatever you have growing. Is there any success you've had trying to replicate that without the Hygrolon?
No, as is a short answer.
Yeah. So maybe the speaker stuff is the next thing to try.
Yeah, I can definitely try that. Actually, my buddy brought in a bunch of Hygrolon from Rizzo, and so I just bought the bag of it. I have enough to do a couple tanks now, so that's what I'm going to be doing. But I might set up, because I'm planning like kind of a Troy aesthetic of like the same size tanks. I'm going to try and do one. Maybe I'll use it as an experiment, do like one speaker foam, or speaker mesh, or whatever you want to call it, and one Hygrolon, and just see the comparisons, like plant similar, if not the same plants in both tanks, and just see how they do.
The speaker stuff's cheap. It's real cheap.
Yeah, it's super cheap. And Hygrolon is not, especially in Canada, it's not cheap. So that's something that I'll probably jot down and actually end up doing, because that would be useful to especially the Canadian hobbyists. But something that you have to know in, I don't know what the demographic of your viewership is, but it really does work great for dart frog keepers. A lot of those vining plants won't have that habit on something like a chameleon tank or stuff like that, just because it's not, I have to say, wet enough, because it, you're misting, like Troy missed 8 times a day for like 15 seconds or something. And a lot of times that's not what we are doing. We'll either do like a couple big mistings or 2-3 small mistings, whatever. It just doesn't have the same properties as a dart frog tank. So if you're a viewer out there and you're wanting something like that, then you have to figure out a way to either limit the ventilation and kind of shut it off, either creating a screen top or a glass top, whatever you want to do. But in a standard Exoterra, it's going to be tough. Just because those roots won't extend out unless there is Hygrolon or the mesh that's constantly moist. They're not going to expand out and attach to a wall that's bone dry for the majority of the day. Yeah,
so, like maybe you could do like a drip wall or something that's constantly dripping there, and it's not making the rest of the terrarium or vivarium wet. Nick, did you have anything to add to that? Because we'll start to kind of wrap up. I have one more topic that I want to, and it's kind of on this same point.
Never tried Hygrolon, so I don't really have an opinion on it.
Okay. So, did you?
Oh, no, that was it.
Okay. Short and sweet. Okay, so, and this is kind of getting into the territory that Mike was bringing up that, and sort of Troy talked about this at the beginning, where it almost feels like you're cheating with the dart frogs because it is relatively easy because you're creating this environment that's just so prime, and the inhabitants don't destroy everything. And that's what we run into with reptiles. Most of them are so rough on plants. It's very tough to have success here. So we might be branching out of Troy's expertise here, except for that little gecko that he has. That's a micro gecko. That doesn't count. So as far as having success with plants, with larger reptile species, what do we recommend? What do we do? How do we have success here without having an environment that's constantly wet all the time, that allows the animal to sort of clamber over things without destroying everything? Maybe, Nick, did you want to go first? Because obviously you have this iguana on your shoulder here. You're going to work on a planted vivarium for him. What are your plans there? How are you going to make it so he doesn't destroy everything?
You got to let it establish a long time, because no matter what, if a reptile were in the wild, it's not going to be in the same place 90% of the time in most of the cases. So it's not going to be constantly running over the same plant over and over and over again. Like you get that with people walking the same path through grass, it just gets worn out. So I'd have my try and hope for when I build Murphy his big vivarium is I'm going to have it set for at least 2 months. So the plants can establish, they'll be well rooted in, and then just pray that he doesn't crush everything and mow it down. But
well, I think that's the thing is it's going to be a large enclosure, and I think that's where people probably struggle with snakes. Particularly, we tend to have smaller enclosures, and with those animals that are rough on plants, you need large plants to be able to handle the roughness of the animals. And you have an enclosure that's too small to fit the plant that needs. So it's sort of this vicious cycle of just getting squashed. So I don't know, Mike, do you have any thoughts on this?
So first you really have to establish what animal you're keeping, and you can either, go into records or research what plants are from that habitat. Obviously, a lot of these places where we get our reptiles have 50, 60 meter trees there. And no matter how hard that reptile tries, it's not going to be able to trample that tree. But you got to keep in mind, and like what Nick said, is it's not the case for any of our enclosures. You could make an enclosure the size of a room and it's not going to matter. A tree's going to outgrow it, Mm-hmm. So it's really choosing safe plants. Like for Nick and I as iguana, we're going to need to pick plants that they can eat and don't have a bunch of latex in them or whatever, like rubber plants and some of the other ficuses and such like that. Like hibiscus, Nick said, that's what I'm planning to do with mine as well, is have a hibiscus plant, pothos, as many live plants as I can. And I think another aspect, especially for Nick and I and people with chameleons and stuff, is that, or veiled specifically, but it's going to eat the plants. there is a high likelihood that this is just going to be a vegetable buffet for your animal. It'll have, hibiscus flowers that'll be great for it. It'll eat the leaves. It's going to happen. Like, you most likely are going to have to buy more than one tree to do it. And I know, like, Bill Strand does this with his chameleons, or for some reason I have the thought that he does this, but he has a bunch of plants that he has growing and he just kind of sets them in the enclosure. The chameleon does what it does, and then he'll take it out for a couple months and let it kind of start to regrow leaves and regrow a bit. And then he'll throw it back in. And it's just a constant rotation of plants. And that's kind of an extreme with the veiled, with iguanas, with herbivores in general. With general lizards and stuff like that, a lot of plants, you're going to want to look for a very, cardboardy texture or almost plastic blank-like texture. So it's a thick leaf. You want something that will actually support the animal or support the majority of the animal. It's especially with like tree frogs and stuff like that. Like the varicosum grows leaves that are, in a tank, you can get a leaf that's this big. Mm-hmm. And for those of you that are listening, like 10 plus inches across. So it's something that is going to look a little strange. You might need to trim it back so it starts growing a little bit like smaller leaves. But those kind of leaves are what they're going to be sitting on in the wild. And that's something that they're going to need and use. So keep that in mind.
Do you guys have philodendron montanum up there?
Montanum?
I've heard.
I don't even know what it looks like.
That's like the big leaf, the heart-shaped leaf there.
Oh.
It's like one of my new favorite aeroids.
I'll have to look for it.
In the 180, I have them. They're huge, really sturdy plants, really like thick leaves. They look super like velvety and like delicate, but I'll like pull on it and it like snaps back.
Yeah.
Like they're very sturdy. Also, I would say, I don't know if you guys have philodendron Lincoln Park up there, but Lincoln Park's another one, really, really sturdy. Like, I'm just trying to think of plants. Like if I had a lizard or something, I was like worried about it.
Yeah.
I think those are two really nice looking plants, really easy to grow. And the Lincoln Park, it does climb. It'll grow a bunch of big leaves and then it climbs and then it grows more big leaves. So it's a cool climber and very sturdy. And the fact that it does grow so, when I take cuttings, I take one leaf and one node, throw it in the tank, and like 3 weeks later, it's like everywhere. It grows fast. So it's like if a reptile or something was destroyed a leaf here or there, it's like nothing to worry about. It's gonna keep growing. So I'm just trying to think of like pothos style plants that are a little more on the rare side or more have a better aesthetic, I think, in my opinion. Just trying to think of plants like that.
Well, I think a part of it too will be people maybe using pots instead of just planting right into the soil. Like maybe have the pot secured up on the wall somewhere so the roots are protected. And even if you have a snake, it's not going to be. Actually, Tanner from Serpent Design did something a couple weeks ago with his king snake. He had these like. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes. I'm sure many people have seen it, but it was almost like a little basket where he contained the roots and the soil within. And so he planted that under the substrate, but that is encapsulated in something that the snake can't tamper with. And so the snake still might snap the stems and snap the leaves and whatnot. But maybe if you had a more of an arboreal setup, maybe you do put pots up in the wall and kind of hide it and great stuff. And that might be a method for keeping them alive.
Europeans do that all the time, like especially like Dutch Rana is one of my big inspirations. I've always looked at their stuff. Since I got into the hobby, they do like a insulation foam boards, and then it's like called elastopore. It seems similar to a dry lock, and they cover that, and then they do great stuff, and they always do pots, always some sort of pot, and then they foam around it. Because a lot of their tanks, that's where I got the idea to do a substrate-less tank. Because their ground areas are set up very similar to mine, sponge filter and moss and leaf litter. But in the background, they have all these pods basically where it's just I don't know if it's I'm not exactly sure what they do, if it's like a plastic pot or if they're doing actually like the mesh pot and they're just foaming around that. But Almost all their tanks, mesh pots. Yeah.
It looks like
what was that again? Can you name that? Was that an Instagram account?
Dutch Rana.
Dutch Rana. You could just Google it, but they do have an Instagram account. I don't know if it's Dutch Rana. I'll check it right now but it'll be boring if someone wants to talk while I do that.
I'll make sure I have it in the show notes as well when we're done, so people can go check it out. Because I think people just need, and Europe's a great place to draw ideas from. We're so stuck with ways that we've been doing things here. We don't think about how you can plant for larger species, and it's definitely possible. We just got to tinker with it to find the right method.
Well, for chameleons specifically, I know like Bill has developed his. I think they're dragon ledges, I want to say. And they're essentially a mechanism to allow you to mount pots on the side of like chameleon tanks, screen tanks, whatever. And it's I don't know if it would be Troy approved because it's not overly aesthetic.
That's a Dutch Rana tank, but you can see the similarities that I get from. And it's just Dutch Rana on Instagram. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, sorry. It's not overly aesthetic, but it works, and it provides, especially for chameleons, the habitat that they require, where you can mount up a hanging Tradescantia, and it's sitting there, and it hangs down and creates a curtain for them to go hide in, or you can put pothos and it grows down. Like it allows you to plant plants, so it's not a typical kind of beginner. I mean, like my chameleon tank was back in the day, where it was just one Schlafera planted in the bottom or set in a pot that has a couple scraggly leaves going up, and it drops all the leaves on the bottom because it's not bright enough light, and now you're left with kind of a skeleton enclosure. And I fully admit that's exactly what my chameleon tank looked like, and I will never have one that looks like that again. So, there's a couple different options out there. Obviously, if you're listening to this, then reach out to us. Like, we're all on social media. We are all happy to answer questions. Maybe don't ask Troy what moss he uses, or do. It's up to you. And we're all open to helping and aiding you in your journey of growing plants.
There's another page I'm going to drop real quick. It's Rana_terrarianbow.de, but they're Dutch as well. That's Dutch Rana. Obviously, they're Dutch. But so here's kind of a construction that's probably washed out like heck, but you can see their pots. They're netted pots. And so they show a lot of picture, like progress pictures of how a tank looks. And then like you'll see it. Like here's them constructing a bunch of tanks. I'm not sure if you can see the glare. And then like that's that same tank we just looked at. And then it's all foamed in. So the bottom area is just sponge filter mat, a very thin layer of it. All the pots and plants they use, they foam in, and then they have like, a picture like that of the same tank. So they show a lot of progress pictures. It's cool like Dutch Rana forever. I would just see their completed tanks and be like, man, that's awesome. How are they doing that? And I'm old school. So new school people, they come right at me. They're just like, hey, I'm new. And they ask me a bunch of questions. Like old school people like us were like, I wouldn't dare ask Dutch Rana, how do you do this? I would never do that. So it was nice to finally find a page like that would see progress pictures, and like, at least I'd be able to look and see like, oh, they're doing that. Oh, they're doing this. Like it was, so that page is better so than Dutch Rana. I don't know if this place is related to them or if they're an affiliate of some sort. But I really love that Instagram page. I could text it to you or offline.
Yeah, just message it to me, and I'll make sure that it's in the show notes for people, because I think that's it's so important to be able to see those progress pictures. And I think another on that topic, and Nick and I kind of discussed this when he was on the show, was creating the environment, or in the Viv, when you're using larger, or when it's for larger reptile species, using wood, driftwood, your branches and whatnot, making sure that that's what the reptile is going to be climbing on and gripping on and perching on. Set up the enclosure so that they don't want to use the plants. The plants are there for all those other purposes, the oxygen and the humidity, and they can still investigate it, but don't set it up where you're asking for the animal to be perching and squishing it. I don't know, Nick, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, like I said in the other podcast, all the plants that people want to grow that will get big enough for an animal to actually perch on, it's going to outgrow the tank. You're not going to fit a 50-foot ficus tree easily into a 12 by 12 by 18. And you got to prune it back, and it's never going to have that same structure. It's always going to be a sapling, essentially. And having large pieces of wood in there that they're able to actually perch on is going to, number one, it's going to save your plant from getting squished. And number two, it's something that's going to give them a more natural behavior than trying to balance on, say, a little umbrella that's really spindly.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there are definitely going to be ways to do this. People just going to have to tinker around and see what works. And some species are going to be more delicate. And like I find my carpet python's fairly delicate with the plants. He climbs through them. He doesn't destroy them. But maybe something that's a little heavier bodied is going to be harder. But you just got to play with it.
Yeah, I've touched on like importance of hardscape, in previous or live streams and other videos. But yeah, I think it is the hardscape is more. It's important to have it, for yourself to look interesting, but also it's good to have a plan to know what you plan on putting in that tank and how they're going to utilize that hardscape. Because hardscape, while it does create something interesting, it's also creating a ton of surface area for animals to walk, crawl, or even just hang out on, rather than like traditional terrariums and old school terrariums where it's just a background and a flat ground. And there was, plants created a little surface area, but yeah, when you're creating lots of plains and more area for plants to grow and also animals to grow, it makes a huge difference in, say an 80-gallon tank with a flat background and a flat ground is 80 gallons. But when you have an 80-gallon tank and there's all sorts of different areas, you're creating a lot. It seems like it's a lot larger space for that animal to utilize.
It increases surface area. Like that's
big time.
Exactly what it does. And it's whether that's for the animal itself or for the plants, and something that I don't know if maybe, I know we want to wrap it up here soon, but it's something to say that, growth habit of the plants is something that I occasionally get questions on. It's like, oh, well, where should I plant it? And there's a couple different answers that you can give and just say like, just do whatever you want. Like if you want to change it, try it out, man. Try it out.
Try it out.
If you want to change it, you can do that. But learning the growth habit of plants, like we were talking about the vining plants and stuff, like if you plant that in the middle of a tank, A, it'll probably die, or B, it's going to, snake along the back and then go straight up. Like it's not going to do well, and it'll take a lot longer to do that. Whereas, if you have a philodendron or whatever kind of nestled in the back, it's going to anchor its roots into the back and start going up. Whatever. Fight me.
Mike and I fought about this 2 weeks ago, and I was using the iTranslate app, and I just kept sending him philodendron, 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 philodendron.
Nick, what do you say?
Philodendron?
Yes.
I've heard both used, though. So.
Okay.
It's a heated debate.
But it is a good point, understanding A, how the plant's going to grow, and then B, how the animal is going to behave inside the viv. And, I think one of my friends, Roy Arthur Blodgett, he's probably listening to this right now. He's been on the podcast before. He has this amazing, it's like 8 foot by, I forget, it's a huge enclosure for these puffing snakes, like big colubrids. And he has all these bromeliads in it. Like it looks very similar to what's behind Troy's head there. And the plants do fine. But he has a whole bunch of hardscape structure where the animals aren't crushing them, and understanding how to do that. So it's definitely possible. I think people get intimidated by it because they put one plant in there and their animals just tear it up, and they're like, well, I guess he doesn't like plants. But you got to work with
Mike's
the animal.
lizard right now is clobbering one of your plants.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, there's a live action right now that iguana is just terrorizing the place.
Oh man.
Well, I think we covered a lot. This might be the longest podcast
I think so.
That's happened. The one I did last week with the Cohab was almost a 2.5. This is going to be 2.5 as well. So is there any other things? Well, it's one of the, again, it's these complicated topics that it's hard to fit within a 10-second TikTok. So hopefully people stuck around. Is there anything else that we, like, wrapping thoughts that anyone wanted to say before we move on, or before we let everybody go?
I can't think of anything besides when someone asks me how to grow a plant, I just say, don't let it dry out. That's it. Just don't let it dry out.
See, this could have been a TikTok.
How do I grow this? Don't let it dry out. That's I think the most important thing is don't let it dry out, but then you get into specifics. Well, don't waterlog it. Don't let it, but I think more often so than not, the only time I ever kill something is when it dries out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I guess I would say just, enjoy the journey and you're going to kill plants. That's the fact of the matter. Like whether you kill the plants or your animal eats them or it kills them by trampling them, like it's a learning process. And yeah, well, Troy, I was with him when he was going through that process of learning from Dutch Rana and not asking him, but picking apart every little story. He'd pick out one second like, oh, that's there. And that's what you're going to have to do. Like, sure, ask us, but you might not get a complete answer. Like we all do have lives. We all do have jobs or, a significant other or a kid or whatever. Like we are busy people and we can't sit there and spend hours and hours. Exactly.
Research is fun. It's fun. It's fun.
Research, look at papers, use the pages or the files section on Facebook groups. Like
pull out your monocle and investigate.
Exactly.
See what's going on. That's what I do.
Yeah. So. And Nick, did you have any closing thoughts?
Not really. Just try
he likes it.
Have fun.
He likes it.
It's
good. I like it. It's good. I like it. Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. Well, so I think don't be afraid to experiment, try things. People could discover different ways to care for plants, especially on the reptile side, which I think is pretty weak on. Or as a community, we're fairly weak on it. So play around with things. Don't be afraid to kill plants, like you said, and hopefully this kind of gave everybody a good broad amount of information. And like I said, we'll try to put together a list of just a bunch of different species that we were throwing out, because I know people will come and ask and say, hey, what species was that? We'll make just a giant catch-all list of what we were talking about, so you can go look at. And of course, like we said, some of those may be extremely expensive, so their list is going to be there, so you can see what we were talking about while we were talking about it. And I was
going to say we could even accumulate, pretty much, like entry level plants, like say $25 and under. Yeah. We could easily do that.
I think that'll be awesome. So we'll make that as a supplement to this episode for people, so they can kind of print it off and have something. And of course, everybody, the show notes will have everything in there, including links to the three gentlemen's respective YouTube channels and Instagram pages and whatnot. Everybody will be familiar with you guys anyway. And I want to thank all three of you. Thank you guys so much for coming here and spending the 2.5 hours talking about plants, talking about microfauna. This was a fascinating conversation, and I know it's going to be a massive resource for people. So thank you very much. All right, that is the end of that roundtable discussion. Nick, Troy, and Mike, thank you so much for stopping by. I had a blast chatting with you guys, and there was just a ton of information in this episode. To the listeners, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, there is that PDF that goes along with this episode. You can download it and print it off. You can find it at animalsathomenetwork.com. Just click on the roundtable discussions header, or there is a link in the YouTube description version of this episode. Again, that will list all the plant species that we discussed in this episode and much more. I hope this episode inspires people who haven't tinkered around with live plants to do so, and those who already are tinkering with live plants, I hope it inspires you to try something at the next level. Maybe order some of those more expensive plants and start tinkering with things that way. My plants are really weak at this point. I think everything I have here has live plants in it, but it's pretty much just pothos and a few other kind of boring plants. So I think I'm personally ready to start tinkering with new plants and trying to have some more plant growth in my vivariums. And as you guys know, I have some heavier bodied snakes, so I'm going to be working on that as well. And if anyone is listening has ideas of how to plant enclosures that have large animals that are rough on plants, how to do that successfully, make sure you put that in the comments. I think if we can have the comment section on YouTube with a bunch of different ideas, that should help us figure out a way to add live plants without the animals, totally destroying them. So as always, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it and you found it valuable, one of the best things you can do is just share it on social media. Share it with other reptile people you know. The more ears we can get on the episode, the better. All right, that is the end of that episode. Thank you guys so much, and I'll talk to you next week.